All right. Today I am going to be interviewing a very special person, even though this is technically on their channel, but they have a very special interview going on today. Some of you on this channel probably don't know who I am, but Jake does. And I have read and looked over the subject of our interview today. But before we get anywhere into that, how about before just
Grab
a
my
quick
visual aid here
promotional.
real
Yeah,
quick.
grab that visual aid.
I would get the more
But
current one, but my girlfriend currently has my only copy. Oops.
well, I mean, a decent amount of people, this will be like their introduction, so this will kind of be like, oh, what even is this? What even is
Oh,
this? So, but before we even get into that, how about you introduce yourself and your work?
well, hello everyone who is watching this on my YouTube channel who probably already knows my name. I am Jake Anderson. Some of you have likely even been subscribed to me for many years at this point, but you probably know me from one of two places, either the Jams and Tea podcast, my weekly music podcast with everybody, all of my friends who run this YouTube channel, or you know me from one of my surprisingly popular film video essays that I made in high school that still do numbers. Hi, I'm that person. And as you all probably, some of you at least know, just because, you know, we are nothing if not shameless self promoters on our podcast, I have shouted out my book series and anything I'm writing currently, Those Who Dwell in the Dark. I have the first volume up as an audiobook available on this channel. But it kind of got buried in terms of all of the uploads that we were doing for the podcast. So, you know, you may not have even seen that. But yeah, this is the book series that I started writing in 2017 when I was a wee lad, a teenager. I'm not a
Ooh,
teenager anymore. It's really weird for me to actually say that out loud, even though I'm 23. Fun.
you were a child then, at least, in your current mind's eye.
In you know, in many ways I think I still am. I gravitate towards younger characters, and that's probably just because I refuse to grow up, but you know, yeah, yeah,
It do be like that sometimes.
it do. But Luke, why don't you tell us what we're doing today and what this entire exercise even is?
All right, so this actually spawned from so Jake has kind of posted a little bit about this on social media before, but I have more or less read the entirety of his series, the Those Who Dwell in the Dark books, currently in the second arc and still in development. Um, and one thing that I kind of wanted to do is for a majority of the time that I've been reading it, I've been sending him multiple memes and just my very just gut reactions to many moments within the book series. And I
I've
thought,
screenshotted several of them just because some of them are too good to not share with the world. Even if you don't know the context of them, sometimes I'm just like, look, you all need to read my books not just because I wrote them, but so you can understand Luke's jokes about them because they're golden. Like this
yeah,
man has a God-given gift.
I guess so. I don't know how I got that. Most likely not through genetics, but you know. Uh, but another thing was after reading what is essentially all the books currently made and released, I kind of thought to myself, like, man, I really want to actually like discuss these books to some certain extent, not just through sending shit posts like without any, like warning, but more like an actual like discussion. But I also thought that, well, you actually kind of brought the idea of doing something that's more of like a introduction at least
Mhm.
to people who haven't read it before, because you know since you have someone to talk to who has now gone through all of this, I can at least talk to about it in some depth that isn't just, gee, I bet this is pretty cool.
Yeah, it was like I'm pretty sure this spawned like it is so strange how many things I'm doing this week that spawned like in a group chat yesterday of us just doing random things. Like I'm pretty sure that Davey Tyler and I are going to do a let's play of Doki Doki Literature Club tomorrow, and I did that an hour before I talked to you about this. So clearly I am in my prolific era.
You are getting your workout.
It's true. It's true. I might as well do it while I'm here. I mean, hey, we've had a year locked up in our houses, so we might as well make the most of it. But as Luke mentioned, he's sort of just been going through the series, as it were. This here, what I'm holding, is the Those Who Dwell in the Dark, Baron's Hollow Omnibus. So I have 5 original volumes in the first part of the story, and this is like the compendium. This is the cheaper version to get a hold of that, and it has a nice cover drawn by the wonderful artist at Seth Keel. I will put him in the description. Go subscribe to his Patreon and give him money because he's a fantastic artist. And I point this out not just because I'm being a complete whore, but because I'm in the process of writing the sequel series, of which the first omnibus, the volumes 1 through 5 for the sequel series, are currently out right now. But I'm going to be uploading this past this Friday when volume 8 will be out. And I am currently writing volume 9. Volume 9 is the last one. So there is going to be, you can buy the individual volumes and you can read them all individually for free on Fiction Press. Check my pinned tweet on my Twitter account to find that. I will have links for everything in the description of this. Yeah, so basically on the way, I will have the third omnibus, and then like it will all be complete. I know it's a little bit wonky just to try and explain the series to people just chronology wise, but like this is the first story, and then I am currently writing the second phase of the story, which is 9 volumes long. But it is about to be done. I've been working on it for 10 months, so it's almost done. Yay.
And also for people who do decide to get into this, unless if you are just deciding to start with the audiobook, even though these are all free, up on his pinned tweet, buy them just despite him.
Fair enough. Oh, and I almost forgot about this. One of my friends, we've sort of just been trying to do this over the course of the last couple of months, but it's very hard because people are busy, people don't have time to do things, but all this stuff. But a very kind friend of mine on Twitter, I will link him. His name is Jen. He's a fellow Kentuckian. He offered to do the complete voiceover for Volume 2. Which is done. I sent that to one of my friends, and they are currently compiling that. So Volume 2's audiobook will be up relatively soonish. I don't know when, but it will be. So lots of things in the Those Who Dwell verse.
Wonderful, wonderful. A lot of big things kind of up in the horizon for, well, maybe depending on when this comes out, maybe you'll be like, oh, Volume 8's already out. But, if earlier, then it's like, oh, hey, Volume 8 and the prospects of Volume 9 and an audiobook.
Yeah, it'll like tons and tons and tons of stuff. And I know poor Luke, you're sitting here and you're just like, I'm doing this interview, and currently I am rested. Like I'm a big fan of the storytelling device of the cliffhanger, and nobody knows that here better than Luke. And he's currently waiting on the last volume because I've been employing that recently.
I will. So here's the thing. This first interview will most likely be just a spoiler free, just kind of getting down into the general, like, oh, what is it that you wrote about your story? But we will have most likely, possibly as a separate video or something, maybe also part of the same.
I will divide this into several segments in terms of spoilers. So watch carefully. It'll be labeled, if you want to avoid spoilers, stay out of the thing that I will clearly mark in bolded capital letters, spoilers. So
wonderful. Yeah. Because I will get mad at you later on, but not now.
I was going to say there is
professional.
I have gotten to the point in my writing career where I can literally say there is a shitload of things I could spoil.
Oh boy.
Yeah, I'm going to have to watch my tongue just because I have lots of things planned out. I will have to hold myself back because there are things that even you don't know. Not even just about what's coming immediately next, but what comes next in the broad scope of things. So I might have to take a bit of an edit to this just in case.
Well, I definitely will not pry, at least in that regard, because I kind of want to keep that to myself as well, or have you keep it to yourself as well. But so for just kind of the first kind of couple of questions, though, for like the more professional, non-spoilery parts of this, so you said that you started kind of writing this around 2017. Was there anything in specific like that got you kind of motivated to start the series or come up with the series in the first place, like influences and that sort of thing?
Oh yeah, there's pretty much everybody I know I've probably told this story to at one point or another. But 2016, I graduated from high school, immediately went into college, and I just sort of did all of my basic fundamental classes online for the first semester, and I went to film school. So second semester was when I started actually doing classes that would work towards my film degree. And I was doing a lot of projects. I had been in this program in high school that was also very media oriented, that allowed me to make like short films and stuff the entire time I was there. So it was already like something I was really, really used to doing. And so I was sort of in the throw of that. I was doing lots of stuff, making lots of stuff. I was writing tons of stuff. I was writing like 5 manuscripts. I had plans for short films, feature films, a mini series, a lot of whom I did with my creative partner, another person who features heavily on this channel, which is Morgan, who you know through undoubtedly some of his short films or from the podcast. And at some point, it was just sort of right after that second semester ended, like right on the edge of summer. It was probably right around this time of year in 2017 when I started trying to get together my first feature. I was trying to get all of my actor friends, all of my friends, all whatever. And the thing about film school and art school is that everyone is flaky as fuck, and you can't organize anything unless you are paying them a shitload of money. And if you are a poor college student, you don't have any money to pay them. So naturally, that did not go through. And I remember that summer very vividly because the AC broke. I was alone in my house for like a month because my mom went on vacation. So I was just sort of stewing in this hot house and fucking losing my mind. And I was like, I need to create something. If I don't, I'm going to explode. And I was just like, I need to make something that only I have to rely on myself for. And I think it was just because it was sort of a big thing at the time, but it was sort of like we live in a post Stranger Things society. I'm literally wearing a Stranger Things shirt. I watched the first season of that last night with my girlfriend. That's weird. But we sort of came off the throes of that, and the 2017 remake of It was coming out, and we were really looking forward to that. So I had sort of a Stephen King brain happening, and I think I was rereading The Dark Tower at the time, and I was like, man, I already wrote a full-length novel my senior year of high school, but I never went over and revised it to make it like viable. So I was like, I know I can write a decently sized novel, so why don't I do that? And I wanted to do something that I could basically do really easily, something that just came really naturally to me. And I'm just like, okay, what if I made a Stephen King thing that was written like it was Percy Jackson, except the characters could say fuck? And that's exactly what I did. I was like, okay, what's going to be the universe here? What's going to be the setup? How am I going to do this? And I was like, okay, what I'll do is I'll make it kind of a series. I'll make them in volumes, and the volumes are around 100 to 150 pages. And I'll just like, it's basically, I think of them like episodes. I would structure it like a TV show, is that there's the first volume, second, third, fourth, fifth. And I was like, okay, I'll write those first 5, and that'll be the first arc of the story. And then I did. And the rest is history. And there are many things that inspired it, but I'm sure I can get into that in some form or fashion later.
Yeah. I do like you mentioned kind of the volumes more as like episodes. I think that's kind of a good way to look about it. I almost sort of see like the omnibuses as like seasons almost of like a series, or like
that currently is the what best way to think of them, in my opinion.
Yeah, or like with I guess it doesn't apply as much since you're still making each volume. But I was thinking like the since the second arc is basically like two omnibuses. It's like, oh, the first half of a season, the season finale, and then second half of the season.
Breaking Bad's season 5A and 5B, kind of
Yeah,
like that kind of deal. And it has a pretty
yeah,
like volume 5 does kind of end on a very like climactic note, like a big thing happens and it's done. But I definitely do think of it like that, and I don't think that's an accident either. Is because I started writing, like I wrote novels in middle school that were fucking terrible. Many ways though, they are, a lot of it is really similar to the stuff I'm writing now, which is very strange. But I wrote those a long time ago, but the things that I first started seriously writing in high school were films. I wrote screenplays. And I think that seeped into my like more like manuscript stuff, is that I tend to write dialogue like it is in screenplay form, and I describe things like screenplays. Like I don't really write like with super heavy prose. I just kind of use colorful language and whatever gets everything. And since it's like first person a lot of the time, especially in Those Who Dwell, it's very it's really more like character writing first and foremost than it is like building a scene, I guess. But it's more or less that.
yeah. And I think like also that was another thing I wanted to touch on is sort of the like each sort of chapter being kind of like from a different character's perspective, which I think is actually a pretty clever way to go about it. Since like if it is something more cinematic, you usually have at least a perspective from at least some character of some kind. It's not as much just like completely objective.
Yeah.
Stanley Kubrick.
No, I think that's completely like that was definitely part of my mindset going in, is that each volume is structured the same way, largely. But like the template is sort of 8 chapters. I have 7 main characters. Each of the 7 main characters gets one chapter in the volume, and then there is an eighth chapter somewhere in there that is third person, that basically tells you anything you need to know that is happening outside of the perception of the main characters. So like I don't really know like I won't lie, that was a pretty smart thing of me to do in terms of like how I just wanted to set everything up, but it's proved to be really efficient, and it makes writing these not like mechanical, but it gives me a structure that I work really well within, and it seems to be something that's easy to consume too. So I'm glad that it seemed to work out that way.
Yeah, I'd say it's definitely very like easy. Well, not as much as easy to consume, but just also easy to follow. Because like I think done in a much more like not as narratively cohesive way, it could have been just like, wait, why am I seeing this from this character's perspective? What is the purpose of this? Whereas like there's almost always a reason for it being like, oh, focusing in on that character if it's just for story utility, or oh, an emotional moment that we kind of need to experience like through this character in some way.
In many ways it's kind of like training wheels, in the sense that it always gets me to like really hone in on what a specific character's journey is within a given arc. So like I can focus on like, oh, what is Chris doing in this arc, and how can I reinforce what he is going through in his particular chapter. And then it also lets me do it in other ones too, and that like I want to write it so that maybe people who are reading will like pick up on things and be like, oh, he said this in this chapter, and now it's being reinforced by seeing him interact with this other person. That's always fun.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. And I think that also brings us to probably our next talking point, which is probably the characters, I'd say.
Hmm.
Which they are it is kind of like, as you said, sort of like the Stephen King, more like it necessarily kind of like cast of misfit characters in a certain sense. And do you have anything that you would like to say about the characters, or and the process of writing them at least?
Well, it does actually tie into a lot of the inspiration of where it actually came from. And that was in college. I had to sort of like, I separated myself from a lot of people that I had known for a long time in high school, because a lot of people I knew went to completely different colleges. And like, I basically had like 2 or 3 normal friends, and really only one who ended up staying with me in the long term. So once I was at the end of that year and starting that third semester of college, I was just like, God damn, I am lonely. And I was just sort of like, well, they say write what you know. So I definitely took inspiration from people I knew in real life and people I was close to sort of write a cipher through them. That said, there may be like 10 to 20% those people and like 80% still me. That was one of the most difficult things conceptualizing the series. Was I was like, okay, I need to write these people as characters and not just different versions of me, which I think I have struck sort of a balance with. But I definitely have explored different issues and different experiences through each of them that I've had, but they've still sort of found their own ephemeral identity. I think after that first arc, like after Baron's Hollow and now the new one, Children of the Grave, especially, is sort of where they sort of all come into their own. And the end of that, I think, is really going to cement where they're going to go from this point onward. Um, they have my seven main characters, and they all meet in detention, very Breakfast Clubby, which I always think is funny because I go back and I have like such a macro idea of what the series is now and where it's going to go and how big the scale is going to be. And then I remember it starts in a fucking detention room in the middle
Yeah,
of
just
some fucking high school shitty ass room. And I'm just like, I can't imagine being like, oh yeah, the story is eventually going to end up here when you read it. And it's just like, oh, this is like the Breakfast Club. It's like,
yeah.
oh boy. And
Like
like,
I will say just from the perspective of where I am now in the series, it's like, oh right, they did start off with just the Breakfast Club, and that's just so weird. Again, not spoiling anything, but just the point where the story is now is just like the complete 180 direction of where that was, at least.
yeah, you just read easily the thing with like the biggest scale that I think I've written thus far in that series. It's really fucking funny. Um, but I will say it's definitely, there are some characters that show through a little bit more than others. I think it's like the most obvious character analog would be that of Joey, who is the
Hmm.
first character you meet. Letter and name starts with the letter J. Um,
Hmm.
Stephen King, big inspiration on me, big inspiration on this series. And if there's one thing Stephen King loves even more than he loves Maine, it is the concept of a character that is sort of a self insert.
Sort of an
Uh,
author surrogate kind of.
yeah, and Joey is definitely, at least at the very start, like most certainly that, even though he definitely takes a different route later on. I actually think that I sort of switch in that, like, Joey and Reese are very obvious analogs for myself and Morgan, and I kind of inadvertently ended up putting more of myself into, like, or at least an even amount of Reese and Joey. And so I think it's interesting, like, the alchemy of these characters and how much they are this and that and the other thing. But that's definitely the most obvious thing. Other ones are just people that I know and that other people wouldn't care about. But that's the end. There are people who I've met like later in life who are my friends who are on the podcast that I host that will show up in the story later.
Some
So,
kind of equivalent of like that character
mm-hmm.
represented through them.
And if you know them, it's going to be real fucking obvious when they show up. So,
It'll be kind of like that SpongeBob meme of like the there I am, just pointing at the TV.
that's me.
That's me.
Definitely.
uh, but yeah, and I think also you mentioned just kind of like how these characters just progress throughout the story, and I think for me, again, just talking in the most vague terms that I'll go into depth later on, but I think that's one of the most interesting things, especially just not as much the like the like the genre elements that you've got going on that make it kind of unique is just how much these characters change throughout, because there's certain characters that do a complete 180, but like, if you look at it in the macro sense, like, oh, it's a complete 180, but when you look at it and when you're reading it volume by volume, you're like, oh wow, that actually is like a genuinely natural progression, and I can't believe that this is now how they've turned by this point in the story. There's some characters you're like, I don't know how well they're going to be by the end of all of this. And then you're just like, oh, they're just freaking the best now. And then there's some characters who are like, oh, they'll get through, right? And then they just are like having a real bad time.
No, yeah, that's I think that was sort of the biggest part of my goal with Children of the Grave, is that I was just like, I need to get to the heart of what each journey is going to be for these guys, because like as in depth and as long as Baron's Hollow is that I view that story as really like a prologue for everything, because when I conceptualized it and when I thought about what the series would end up being, Children of the Grave is what I like planned on, because it was like this thing of like the kids having to balance their normal high school lives between that of the sort of other world that becomes involved with the story. And I wanted to sort of be like, okay, there's going to be a pretty big shift at the end of Children of the Grave. And the characters are going to be in a very different situation than they started out all of this. So they need to sort of be in a different place, and the audience needs to know exactly where they are and how they got there. Because like I think the two biggest examples of just like people who you're just like, oh, they're like good now, is definitely like Leo, who like just Baron's Hollow, like again, no spoilers, but like Leo is just down horrendous those first 5 volumes, and it just only gets worse for him. And then
Yeah.
feasibly at the end of Children of the Grave, at least at the end of like where you are right now, no spoilers for the
Yeah.
ending or whatnot, but like he's definitely in the upper tier of like things are going okay-ish relatively.
Yeah,
Um,
honestly, that's one of my favorite developments because like I think that was one of the first big memes that I made, was just like Leo just having just the absolute worst time you
the
could imagine.
Wolverine meme where he's just like sitting there, and then the two characters who make, I think it's Jean Grey and
Yeah.
Hawkeye, or not Hawkeye, fucking what's his stupid name? James Marsden. What's his
Oh,
Cyclops?
yeah,
Cyclops.
Cyclops.
It's them like making out in the background, and he's just in the foreground sitting there, and it's like that's Nadia, Izzy, and Leo. Which
Yeah.
I think I sent that to Morgan, and he was just like, oh my god. But yeah, that was one thing that I wanted to really emphasize purposefully, because this is sort of spoilery, but I won't be specific as to how. Is that in the end of Baron's Hollow, something really, really bad happens to Leo. And the thing is that there's one thing that I see in writing that is kind of a trope that at least bugs me. It doesn't like affect me personally, but it definitely bugs me, is that characters who encounter some sort of physical deformity or handicap, um, a lot of them are written in a way that's like it's still sympathetic, but it's also like, oh God, woe is me. The world is no longer worth living in if I can't live it without this thing. And it's like,
Hmm.
sure, I mean, yeah, obviously those things are bad and terrible, but also I know a lot of people who are disabled who are like, I want fiction that like a doesn't define me by this, and B doesn't paint my life as like a complete fucking burden. And that was
Hmm.
part of my goal with Leo, was to just be like, he's still got a lot of things and he can like overcome, because he's this very strong, very stalwart character who's able to do all of these things. And I feel like that might be a progression some people see and be like really, they might see some of themselves in that. And that's a lot of my goal with writing a lot of these people, is for people to feel seen.
Yeah. And I think that also brings us to another good question in terms of characters, is that I won't necessarily be specific because I think some of it is a bit spoilery,
Mhm.
but there is a lot about well, Leo is like a disabled character, but also like LGBT characters in this
Mhm.
story that are pretty significant in their development throughout the series.
Oh
And I
yeah.
was wondering if you had anything that you wanted to talk about on that.
Yeah, that's sort of that was something I wrote about when I didn't know a whole lot about that particular avenue of my life and my experience when I started that, and I think I kind of found some things out through that. Um, but I definitely always wanted to have that focus. I don't know if that was like subconscious or that just sort of like happened to be a coalescence where I just kind of like had a realization at some point. But like that was from the outset something I wanted to do, was because stories like this, stories like it, stories that I love, they're definitely often geared towards the same group of people, and the same people are always represented in those stories. And I was just like, well, it's not always the case. I do live in some nowhere Kentucky town, which is where Barentalo is. It's a nowhere Kentucky town. And once I got into high school, like literally everyone I knew was just like that. Like I don't think I had a single friend by the time I was in senior year who wasn't either gay or cis. Like they were just like they were they were either gay, they were trans, they were non-binary, they were something. And I was just like, these people deserve their own representation in here, but they also don't deserve to be solely defined by that. So I was just like, well, why don't I just sort of throw it out with reckless abandon and just kind of be like, okay. And I wanted my first like proper romance, which is something I really enjoy writing. Like I love romance and schmaltzy shit. Is that I wanted it to be one that was between two women, and I was just like, that's just something that you don't really see enough of. We get like go back to something like Stranger Things. It's like you have a character who's like in one episode confesses that they are who they are, and then it's just like that's it though. And it's like it's like you're
stops.
Yeah, it's like you're close, but like can we have like an actual and I feel like a lot of media that's especially directed at like kids and teenagers now these days is like kind of gearing towards that. I've seen stuff from new cartoons, like I believe one's called like Amphibia, and there's Infinity Train, and there's like lots of, and Legend of Korra obviously is like we're sort of like on the dawn of like a new representation thing. And it's not everything, but it's also like I just kind of wanted to lend them the dimensionality that they deserved. And it's also just it's a source of great anxiety in a place like where Barentalo would be, a place here. I've seen a lot of my friends and myself struggle with both external and internalized homophobia, which is something that gets confronted at several points. And at its core, it is still very much a horror series, and that's sort of the root of many subtextual horrors, is that I mean, even the It movies actually delved into that a little bit. Is that was always subtext in that book, and they were just like, let's just make it the text now. And that sort of always seems like a lot of horror that I've really enjoyed in the past decade has been really, really progressive in terms of like how it's thought about the sexuality of women and stuff. Like one of my favorite movies is the 2018 Suspiria remake, or just like the ideas that are being put to the forefront of horror are just sort of making these things and like reclaiming them. And I kind of wanted to see if I could take my own part in that. Not that it's like important or anything. It's just like, I just want to do it.
Yeah, it's. I think in a case like this, it's like you want to do it, but it is still important to you, and I think you're doing it well, quite frankly. So
well,
I mean,
thank you. I try.
You try, and that's all that matters.
That's true. That's true.
But yeah, and I think like especially with like this kind of thing where it is sort of just you're not really like having to answer to a specific publisher necessarily. Like you are able to kind of do that on your own and kind of develop that in the way that you would want to.
That's definitely a really liberating thing that I feel like I see like in struggles. Like, oh my God, there was like a news article that was like happened. Oh God, this is going to sound so memey, but it's still totally in reference to what I'm talking about here, is that the discourse on Twitter for the last 2 days has been permeated by the animated Harley Quinn and Poison Ivy show.
I know what you're going to talk about.
Yeah, the studio executives banned a scene from that show because they weren't allowed, the creators and writers, they weren't allowed to show Batman going down on Catwoman, which because, and I quote, heroes don't do that, which first of all, objectively false. Secondly, I find that to be a bizarrely drawn line in the sand of just being like, really, this is like it's the 2020s, man. This is a bit much. Like this is like a straight couple, and this cartoon is like not even like a super serious one, but that's just
for adults too.
Yeah, it's mostly enjoyed by people who like adult cartoons, and I'm just like, Okay, so like I don't really understand what this change is meant to like do. I don't know like who in your audience is going to be scared off by this, and I know that that's the case for like so many other things. So like the one good thing about being an independent creator is that I answer to myself, and that's sort of the thing that it's just like it lets me take things as far as I want to go. Is that it's just like if I was with a publisher, what would happen is that they would probably make me tone down a lot of the violence, a lot of the gore and like horror imagery, and they would want to make it like a YA thing, which it's
Hmm.
definitely it's not young adult fiction, but it's also like I feel like it's that, but without any like holds barred or necessarily. It's just like
Yeah.
everything is as violent as that would be. It is like terrifying. There's like really intense shit in it, and they swear and they talk like normal people and they go through normal things and they do it with like pretty startling detail. And it's just like, oh, characters have sex, and it's like, they do. But I don't ever have to worry about people being like, oh, well, somebody might read this and not like it. And it's just like, no, I just want to tell the story. I don't really fucking care.
Yeah, exactly. It's not like, oh, I don't know if this creative decision is going to cost me my, like creative
Yep. And
position
like
in
like
this.
the second chapter of the first volume of the story is fucking Nadia just being like, yeah, I am in unrequited love with Izzy, and I'm just like, so if anybody has a problem with getting on the gay train, get off, leave. I don't care about you. Be gone.
You may leave the train now by falling off of it.
This, yeah, I was just like, this is that we are here for the ships, and that is what we are here for. That is my goal, is to create a story popular enough for fan fiction to be written about. So I want one day in like 10 years to like log on to like Archive of Our Own and see like an enormous amount of like tags for different ships. I know in my heart that Reese and Joey will be one of them.
That's what I was gonna say, actually. I was gonna say it's like, so not as like a, oh, I am super into the shipping sometimes, but I was like, this has some momentum to it. This
it,
has
it
some meat to it.
it definitely, that's the thing, is that like a lot of it too is that I'm a big believer in people being very fluid, ever changing as a being, as I am. But I sort of indirectly in Children of the Grave state that Reese is bi. I never really talk about it with Joey just because it's like not at the forefront of his
It's,
character
it's
right
not
now.
really important. There's other
No,
stuff going
but like
on.
I don't really draw many lines in the sand when it comes to that. Like, I mean, it's like unless I explicitly say something, then they could be anything as far as I'm concerned. And I don't say that in like a lazy J.K. Rowling way. I say that in more
Yeah.
like they could be. They just don't. Maybe they don't know it yet. They're teenagers. I don't
I
know. I
think
didn't
of it
know.
more in like the way that Mark Hamill talked about like people viewing Luke
If you
Skywalker.
if you think he's gay, then he's gay. Yes,
Hey, yeah.
exactly, Mark. Exactly.
Thank you,
Um,
Mark.
and yeah, and there's definitely going to be like more of that because like I, there's always the risk you run of like when you do something like that you can get accused of tokenism, which lines can be like drawn or whatever, but it's just like I feel like I have enough characters that sort of are spread throughout the spectrum. It's sort of the reason why I don't pay a super big amount of attention to, it's like I have one character who isn't white, and that's mainly because it was just like, I, as a white person, do not feel equipped to tackle racial subjects. So, I won't. It's just really that simple. But at the same time, I also don't want to solely portray people of one skin color just because I think that that's like just kind of weird. Is it's just like if you're writing a story that isn't about race and you just have this monotonous view of how people can look, that it's just like, well, that's strange.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's essentially the excuse of like this story is not about race, therefore all white.
Yeah, and then again, that's how you get fucking J.K. Rowling and character names like Cho Chang. Thank you. uh
Oh, really? Oh God, I
oh, did
didn't
you
know
not
about
know
that.
that? Yeah, that's
I
like
only
the
read two Harry Potter books in my entire life.
they were the first book series I ever read, so unfortunately, I do possess a large amount of fondness for them. Admittedly, it's mostly through the movies, just because that they were how I
Hmm.
like learned about cinema. And like, if you've ever seen the Prisoner of Azkaban movie, it's just like Jake really likes this fucking movie because this is just those who dwell in the dark. Um,
I could see that a lot,
it,
honestly.
there's a lot of it in like just especially that story. I watched that recently and I was just like, God damn, like I didn't even like consciously do that, but there's just so many elements of this where I just see different things that are like traced back to that. But it's, yeah, her sort of characters are just sort of like, she's got like that one tweet that went viral of just like, are there any Jewish wizards? And she fucking lists some name like Eliza Rosenberg or something, and I'm just like, oh my God, I can't do
Pain.
this. Yeah.
Actual pain.
And like, and two, it's like, they're all characters who grow up from the same place and it's all in the South, but it's just like, even then the South isn't exactly a monolith. And on the horizon, there is going to be a sort of organization. You'll know what I'm talking about. There's sort of an organization of people within this universe who are sort of collecting people from multiple backgrounds, cultures, and time periods. So there's sort of that force in the story that's going to have like tons of different kinds of people. So that's cool, but it's not in the story yet, but it will be.
We'll be getting to that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
At some point.
Yeah, some point in the future, which God, I don't know when, because I've, believe it or not, I have had the whole story planned out since I believe I finished the first arc. I think I put everything in stone. So I've had minor changes, of course, just because, like, that's just the way writing works. Like, I'm pretty sure I added in a pretty significant detail, like, to the outline of where this entire saga is going, like 3 weeks ago, just because I had a really cool idea and I was like, oh shit, I need to do that. And that'll be a thing. But like, I've had the idea for Children of the Grave and everything that's happened in it since like July of 2018.
Not gonna lie, I find that genuinely impressive that you just kind of have the outline of just this big, massive world and series at like, I don't know, how old were you at that time?
I was 19.
19. It developed it so this much so far.
The key to it is not having a social life for the most part and watching a lot of anime. That is one little like unsung inspiration for those who dwell, is that I think is maybe more prominent than like anything I normally cite. Is like, I normally cite it as like Stephen King, Neil Gaiman, and Rick Riordan as very, very, very influential authors. But like anime in general, and also video games, particularly the Persona series, really, really influential on the kind of story that I wanted to tell. I was also it is going to become very obvious in the story from this point onward, if it's not already, that I was an enormous fan of the show Bleach as a teenager. I think I watched maybe 300 episodes of that show and I was obsessed with it for the longest time. Even though now I think that like maybe 1/6 of that show is good and then the rest of it is not. But I was definitely cribbing ideas from shows like that when I was writing things in middle school, and in some respects I guess I still am. But like stuff like that, I have every volume of Hiromu Arakawa's Full Metal Alchemist, which is my favorite thing ever and will always bleed its way into something that I make, one way or another. Leo particularly, I was just kind of like, oh man,
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, me either. And then I was just like, oh shit, she strikes again. Another person who's deeply influential on me, I would say, is Kentaro Miura. Rest in peace. Fucking bunch of volumes of Berserk down there. And hell, what the fuck else do I have down here? One Piece in many respects. I think Junji Ito also has like a visual horror influence on me, is that I look to a lot of like, I definitely look to things like Stephen King and Neil Gaiman for like literary horror, but when I describe things, I like to do it in a visual way. So I do go to my references of anime and film most of the time.
Yeah, that's where your two big influences kind of merge and becomes your own thing.
Yeah, sort of. I like to think that I'm inspired by so many things that it doesn't really have a direct analog. Like, I hope that's kind of the thing.
No, I'd say, yeah, like it isn't like, I could just be like, oh, this is just This is just Jaws for the forest or something like that.
Fucking does for the forest what Jaws did for the
This
ocean.
shit. No, it's not something like that where it's just like so painfully obvious like what it is that the influence was, but that there are just like a bunch of very kind of not necessarily conflicting, but a big variety of influences, and it's like some of them I know about, like watching Berserk very recently kind of opened my eyes quite a bit on that,
Oh
and
yeah.
some I don't know. Like I have never played a Persona game in my entire life, and I don't know anything about them. But if I did, I
If
think
it,
I could see
I
it.
could give you Persona 3 on the PSP, and then you would play like maybe 5 hours of that game, and you would be like, "You sly motherfucker! you, I see what you fucking did here." And that's
Goofed
basically
me.
my end goal. Was it's just like my thesis wasn't to do like this, but like me. Is my end goal was just like, what is the like? I wanted to write the ultimate thing that I would want to read when I was 15. It was just like, I want to read something that if somebody handed it to me, I would be like, this is the best fucking thing ever. And maybe it wouldn't be, but I wanted to make 15-year-old me like fucking freak the fuck out, because I would have gone nuts for shit like this.
Exactly. That's kind of the small stuff that I've written. That's kind of more or less been what my philosophy has been as well. Is just like, what is stuff that I currently really like, and if I was not writing it, would I be willing to try to make this somehow? And be like, oh,
Yeah.
I'll write that then, and then I usually give up halfway.
I mean, we all do. Lord knows, I've got many projects in the works where I'm just like, I'll finish you one day.
One day you'll have your time in the sun. uh, but like at least that you have this amount of dedication for just one like story in specific, at least, because it's yeah, it's like fucking. I look at like the amount of story that you've written so far for this. I'm just like, holy shit! Like I like not to keep referencing J.K. Rowling, but like everybody knows her, and so it's an easy comparison to make. But like she was like 32 when she made the first like Harry Potter book, and each one of them has been like 300 pages to like 700 pages, and you've been
Yep.
cranking out like you cranked out two 700-page omnibuses so far, and you're not like even 32.
Yeah, I won't lie. It's I do hold a little pride in that. It's just like, not that I think every word of it is gold or anything, but I'm sitting here and I look and I have an amalgate for the story on Fiction Press, and Baron's Hollow is 183,000 words, all 5 volumes, and Children of the Grave, the 8 volumes that are out right now. It's lacking one, which, and they average in at about 35 to 40,000 words. That currently sits at 330,000 words. So altogether, it's approximating it's a little bit over 500,000. So it's thick, but I think another thing that's important about my writing is that, again, Stephen King's influence is that, like, my goal is to be consumed, is to be read, and I want it to be accessible. And a lot of things that are in the fantasy or dark fantasy genre are these impenetrable George R. R. Martin, J.K. Tolkien, Jesus, fucking brain rot, J.R.R. Tolkien. You
Mid
have these
2000s brain be like.
oh God, insanely. Like, I think one of the inspirations for, I wrote a very long fantasy novel last year in between these sort of arcs of Those Who Dwell in the Dark. And one of my biggest inspirations was I went back to read Lord of the Rings at one point, and I was just like, damn, this is fantastic, but I can also only read like one chapter at a time, because absorbing this is like trying to like eat a dictionary. It's
Yeah,
just so impenetrable, and I want to make things that are in this genre that other people will like. It's why people think that, like, oh, fantasy is a genre for nerds, and I'm like, no, fantasy's fucking dope. It's just that you take a one look at The Hobbit and you're just like, this shit's lame, bro. And it's like, you're wrong, but also I really can't blame you.
it's like first point, at least it's not the Silmarillion, and two,
It's
um,
true.
like, and I think that's like one thing that it got me engaged in it, because I am very much of the same mindset. There have been a lot of shows, anime, live action, any kind of animation, just any sort of medium that deals with fantasy or science fiction, where there's just like so much stuff, so much like buildup of lore just like dumped on you that you don't understand the actual significance of it, where it's just like, I don't care. These are just
Yeah,
words. I am looking at words, or I'm hearing things that I do not correlate with any emotional connection. Whereas here, it's just a very normal scenario that just kind of progressively gets more strange, and then we get the fantasy elements.
yeah, I always try to view it through the lens of characters. I think one of the most recurring writing things about Children of the Graves that I have to get really, really in details about how the mechanics of like the shit in this that's like supernatural works. Um, and what I always try to do is I'll have like a big long thing didactically explaining what the fuck is happening. And then there will always be one character that means like, so basically you mean this. And
Yeah,
it'll be
layman's
like,
terms.
yeah, it'll just be like, yeah, okay. Which I mean, it makes sense because you have these kids who are being explained by these people who are authorities and do know like what they're talking about, and they have to relay this information. So it makes sense within the context of the universe. But it's just like I just want the audience to know what the fuck is happening. And it's also I feel like there's like especially with manga and anime is that it's not because I'm inherently better. I'm not going to compare myself to people who are like top tier in the medium like Aichiro Oda or anything, but people who have those long form stories, like people stories like Bleach and whatnot, who they're really great for like a certain amount of time, and then eventually they'll just kind of fall off or start repeating material. And the reason that happens is because the manga industry fucking annihilates you. It's like you have to be a storyteller, you have to be able to write dialogue, and you have to be able to be like the best drafts person ever in terms of drawing. And I can't draw worth a shit. So like the talent that
Guilty
those
here
people
too.
have is insane, and they have to spread themselves thin. And it's only natural that like again, there is one person in the world who has been able to maintain a story that has been successful for this long, and it's Aichiro Oda, and he made One Piece, and One Piece is like the most like it's basically the third most popular work of serialized fiction behind Batman and Superman. And it's that way because he's literally a 1 in 1 billion kind of talent that we will never, ever see again. And I am thankfully working with the same amount of influences, but in a completely different medium that does not require me. Like, I have complete freedom. I can release these whenever the fuck I want. So I am very thankful of that, and I want to take advantage of it.
And also, you won't have to risk the possibility of just completely destroying your hands for life.
No, yeah. Oh God, the shit that they have to go through is just like, I obviously have immense sympathy for any author because, it's a lot of hard work. I won't deny that. And I've definitely put my share of blood, sweat, and tears into it. But if you asked me to be like, oh, now you have to draw all of that, I'd kill you. I'd fucking kill you. No.
You get a stick figure. Fuck off.
Oh God, trying to convey those who dwell in the dark with stick figures, it loses a lot of the gravitas.
I mean, that's more or less like what storyboarding it would probably be, and you just have to be like, okay, listen, this is actually really cool. This is just for reference.
That picture of Ryan Johnson's storyboard for Knives Out, where Ana de Armas is just the little stick figure, and the knives are just a bunch of little like slashes, comes to mind. Like that's me. That's the level of talent that I operate.
Freaking same here, man. Uh, and all right, I mean that covers more or less all of the questions. I have one more question, just because I am generally pretty interested in it, or this question is one I'm generally interested in. One just to kind of end off our interview section.
Mm-hmm.
Firstly, one thing I noticed and is kind of a prominent thing is music is a pretty prominent like little storytelling
Oh yeah.
aspect, both in like the choices of like already existing songs and also just like pieces of lyrics used at the beginning of like each volume. And I was
Mm-hmm.
curious what was behind some of those choices.
Well, all roads do in fact go back to Stephen King. He's done that a couple of times, especially in the more significant works that like I've read. He'll always like it's always just works really well to set the tone. It's not like something like super meaningful or profound or whatever. It's just like I tend to find that it's just like, oh, if I can find a song that I love that is tangentially related, has something to do with the theme that I'm trying to get across in a given volume or a given character or a given struggle, I'll try to do that because it will sort of subliminally, if the audience knows what that is, then they'll be like, oh, okay, so this is kind of what the mood, the tone, the atmosphere is. And there's also the off chance that some of my more esoteric music references will get more people to listen to cool bands. I can't imagine I believe the song quote I'm using for Volume 9 is from the progressive death metal band Strapping Young Lad, which, significant less people listen to that than they would say David Bowie. Um, but
Fair
I'm
enough.
a very, obviously I have a music podcast. I'm a very musically oriented person. I have 70, I fucking, in the mail, I got a new laptop today, and along with it, there was a Sufjan Stevens vinyl that came with it. So
Oh, that's what that was. Okay.
yeah, it's actually a collab between him and one of the guys who's in the band The National, and it's like a concept album about the solar system, and it's just Sufjan
Hmm.
writing all of the songs, and it's just super
Interesting.
spacey. But that's like listening to music like that is always like born from something in there. I love things with music references like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure anime with
Mm.
like a shitload of musical references, and I try to like bury them in there sometimes. I just think it's a neat little thing to do. It gives them all their own identity and like title. It just sort of like, and it also sort of clue people in like these are the kind of things that I'm listening to when I'm writing things like this. I would write like they might not necessarily feature, like sometimes they do even feature in like the text of the volume. I think I did it with a slow dive song in volume 4 of Children of the Grave, and in Baron's Hollow I think, yeah, I used the Johnny Cash version of You Are My Sunshine for volume 3, which is in that volume. So sometimes they're like an intertextual thing, but
Hmm.
mostly it's just to be like to just sort of convey an idea or a mood of some kind, because I think music does that super well, and it's sort of like an intersection of all of the things that I like. It might hold like a little bit, like if somebody knows a lot about the song or knows like what the deal is, they might be able to put the thematic machinations together a little bit better. I wanted to like try, and because I know I'm going to write a lot of volumes down the road. I wanted to try and save a lot of artists that I love for later, which I completely blew my load on that first Baron's Hollow thing, because I used David Bowie and
Yeah.
Johnny Cash, who are like two great songwriters, and I also used Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds song "Oh Children" at the end, which sort of hints at like that's a song about the generation of kids that was kind of fucked over by World War I and World War II, and how they sort of inherited this generational trauma from their parents, and how it's not exactly completely obvious now, but in terms of like the greater themes of what the entire story is going to end up being, in my opinion at least, it's about the complicated relationship that kids have with their parents. And I sort of wanted to convey that in the sense that like you have this intense massive burden that's being laid onto these main characters, and this whole struggle just sort of relies on the sins of the fathers and mothers just sort of being inherited unfairly on these people, and this whole like pretext of this war that's been being fought for hundreds and hundreds of years. And just sort of like things like that, where people will be like, oh, if they're like in the know, they'll be like, oh, okay, I can get what's going on here. So again, like
See the
most
connection.
tricks in my writing, it's training wheels, but it's also like a little bit of flavor, I guess.
Yeah. I kind of see it as like one thing I think is sort of advantage of like the age of the internet is that you can make these musical references and then be like, oh, I can actually listen to that while
Yeah, people have
reading it.
Spotify now. You can just go and like figure that out and be like, oh, and that kind of creates like an engagement thing too, is that people can be like, oh, I can go listen to this song that I've never heard before, or that I have heard or haven't heard in a while, and I can like try and put together how it's like related to this. It might be a cool thing to discover.
Yeah.
And it also gives me a good excuse to title them after song titles, which gives them cool names, which I'm a big fan of. You can and it just shows off my incredibly um, near obsessively labyrinthine musical taste. Which obviously gets me loads of bitches. It's super great.
It's the
Um,
best.
oh yeah,
I wish I
absolutely.
had a labyrinth mind.
Hey girl, you listen to Deftones. That's
Take a look
just.
into my labyrinth mind, babe. Or fucking whatever.
I'm pretty sure that happens a couple times in the story.
I don't like the implications of that, sir. that does not make me very, very comfy. So, this brings me to my last question, which is more or less a subtle segue into us getting into our spoiler discussion.
Okay.
In the vaguest, most undescriptive way possible, what could you say to expect for the rest of the series going forward from where we are right now?
Oh man. I talked about Baron's Hollow as sort of being like a prologue in a sense, and like a really on a like a large scale. That's sort of the purpose that it serves. And Children of the Grave, I think, does a decent job of sort of the gradual escalation that I want to build to of the larger world and giving you a window into like, oh, this isn't just like one thing. This is a very big, very broad and very all-encompassing conflict that's going on here. And you sort of get it and see how it relates to the characters. And Children of the Grave is sort of just like how this affects them and mostly only them. Whereas from this point forward, with even just a little bit of the next volume, but like from then on, like with the third arc, and the fourth arc, and the fifth arc, there's five. It's sort of, but mainly the third. That's like the biggest escalation I think I'll have is sort of a reversal of that. Is that we don't see how this conflict that's sort of a little bit distant and pushed off because the characters are still being kind of trained and learning and sort of going through this like growing up process. And they're like learning about all this stuff. And then it's a reversal of just being like seeing how they affect the conflict and not how the conflict affects them. And you sort of get like, you'll see the inner politics of the greater organizations that are being spoken of and like factions of characters and their allegiances and the history between the two of them. I do have lots of ideas for spin-offs of that will be related to different parts of this particular universe that I'm probably going to go into that will elaborate on some of those things. I probably won't make any of them like essential just because I don't want it to be too labyrinthine. But the big thing here is that it's the next part is going to be very sprawling and there'll be a lot of resolution, but I want it'll sort of blossom out and then it'll come back together. Like it'll be like the first like Baron's Hollow is like 5, and then Children of the Grave's like 9 volumes. I foresee the next arc, the third one, being maybe possibly anywhere from 12 to 15 volumes. And then the fourth being probably as long, maybe a little bit longer. And then the final one would probably be 5 again. It'll
kind of
sort
just
of
a brisk 5.
yeah,
Just a
you'll just kind of
conclusive little bit.
yeah, you'll sort of branch out and then come back together. And it'll take the characters that you've been spending all this time with to different places, and you'll see how they've changed and how these changed versions of themselves will interact with this stuff that I've been talking about this whole time. So can't get into the nitty gritty, but I am nothing if not a man with a plan. So.
And I know one element of your plan, and is to cause immense pain to me on an emotional level for the next fucking 25 volumes of the rest of the series.
Yeah, I won't lie. Sometimes it's kind of nice hearing that the intended emotion was gotten across in startling detail. Like that was sort of my like I really want to go for the throat with some of these, and apparently I have.
You did, you fucking prick.
I first of all, I love hearing that. Please insult me all you want. My girlfriend recently started reading Baron's Hollow, and she's sort of been telling me what she's been thinking as she's gone along. And she's like, she got to the 3rd volume, which I cite as a very notoriously like, hey, if like you are triggered by sensitive topics, be very careful with this one. And she's just like, I was like, okay. I mean, she's like, like we watched Hannibal together, and she thinks that show's like fun, and we have a good time watching it. And so, I was just like, tread with care, but like also you might be okay. And she read it, and she's like, I had to take a break between each of these fucking chapters because it was a lot. And I was like, oh god, and that was like 19-year-old Jake. Oh no, when you get to the later stuff, oh dear god.
Oops, all berries.
Oops, all trauma.
Basically.
Oh no.
Well, I think on that note, this would be a good time to transition into our more spoiler-filled
Spoilers.
discussion, which, quite frankly, I do not have specific questions written out. I just kind of want to make a ramble about it because
Cool.
there's a lot to
I'm
ramble.
happy to talk about it just because any excuse to talk about this shit has me glowing.
So let me just start off with my first thing is that this whole story basically starts off because Chris pisses on a corpse in the fucking woods.
That is the complete impetus for all of this is that if Chris did not accidentally piss on a corpse, very, very happenstance, then none of this would have happened.
They would have probably died like some of the other characters had died within like, the whole weird happenings going on in like everybody's house.
They also may have they could have gone their separate ways. Maybe some of them would have remained friends, but some of them, they might not have even been touched by this conflict. Victoria and Stephen could have gotten to the monster and then fucking killed it, and then they had no idea.
So there's kind of an alternate universe of something that could have happened where it's like, yeah, they didn't really become friends and just had their own things going on, but hey, Victoria and everyone else, they just kind of got it taken care of. Nothing much of a big deal.
Yep,
but fucking that's not how the world works.
It's the most inconsequential of things that can lead to the most horrifying of circumstances, really.
Pretty much.
And I like to think I represented that well. I one of the reasons that I used the song Heroes by David Bowie for the second volume is that I've always listened to that song, and I've always read it as being a song that's like two people who are out of their depth and maybe possibly drunk, is one person talking to another person saying that like, hey, maybe we can delude ourselves into thinking that we're greater than we are, that we can be these heroes just for like one day, even though we know we're going to wake up and discover the inevitability that we're just human at the end of the day. And that's because in the second volume, they're all like, let's go with a bunch of guns and knives and weapons into the woods and kill this fucking monster. And then they fail horribly. Like it is a complete fucking disaster.
It is a very disastrous. It's
they think they're like, yeah, we can fucking do this, kind of, probably, and then they don't. They really don't.
It is, well, from that point on, volume 3 happens, which, yeah, we already kind of touched on that. It's just so, well, there's two things I want to talk about. That one is just, yeah, everyone just has a complete horrific nightmare situation happen to them.
I believe you described it as like Evangelion happening.
Yeah, I described it as everyone having a Shinji moment.
And yeah, that's like, that was always like the structure, like when I set up and outlined everything before I got started, I was like, this is going to be the thing where I get weird and trippy and everybody's going to have a weird nightmare, and I'll like interweave maybe some world building things and some foreshadowing and some other things, but like mainly get to the heart of like what these characters will be all about. And I was like, I hope I can like find it within myself to really make this like a significant moment and be like a real turn for the narrative. And as I was writing these, I had my first encounter with heartbreak as I began volume 3. And that sort of let me channel a darkness I did not have inside me previously into being a little bit, frankly, mean-spirited. It's kind of tough to read. Like, I don't particularly care for going back and reading Mary's segment, because that one is
like, that one's the roughest one, honestly. Like even for the horrible stuff that happens in Joey's chapter, like this one's just like actually like physically happening to the character, and it's
Oh
probably
yeah.
worse because of that.
I think I had that mentality because Mary in that point of the story is the character who has kind of the least going on internally. Like her entire conflict is that she's basically just sort of like shadowing Izzy and just thinks that she's super cool and really wants to be like her and doesn't know how to do that and doesn't know how to socialize because the person that she's based on, at least, the impression that I got from them when I was friends with them way back when was that they didn't really understand how like people worked, and they told me once that they were just like, I just kind of feel like I mimic what other people do so that other people will think that I'm normal. And I'm like, that's it. That's what Mary is that she's
Hmm.
basically like this very well liked person who no one actually knows anything about because she doesn't know who she is. And then that's the entire basis for her conflict later, is that she's just like, oh God, I survived that. Who am I? Fuck.
What do I do with this information?
Yeah, and I wanted to like root a lot of things in that, and for like later, like some of those things won't even make a whole lot of sense. Like Izzy's chapter specifically is like a
Yeah.
really like that won't make sense until you read Children of the Grave, at least. Like you'll just sort of be like, that was weird, but also like what?
Yeah, that was the second point I want to make, especially about Volume 3, is like, so Izzy's chapter is the only one that isn't necessarily like specifically like, oh, a direct nightmare situation, but more like oracle prophecy vision, basically.
Yeah.
And that makes me very worried because
Mm-hmm.
the implications of that are not good if maybe her prophecy vision is accurate.
Yeah, that's sort of what I wanted to deal with, was the sort of uncertainty, is that she's a character who her sort of impetus is that she's known something was different about her whole life, and now she discovers it. And then it's like, she gets all of these questions answered, and then at the end of this particular rainbow is not a pot of gold, but another fucking question. And that's sort of what Children of the Grave is about, is that it's just like there's never any true resolution in life, and that you will always encounter a new problem. And that's kind of like the whole mentality of everything is a circle. Every character in that at one point talks about having deja vu or remembers something that happened in the first arc, and it's just like, is this happening again? And
Yeah.
there's sort of a cyclical nature to it. And Izzy's sort of inclination towards like seeing visions of the future, sort of like that's sort of her conflict is for later, is it's just like, oh, there's a very real possibility that I have the most likely chance of dying in all of this. And now that I am attached to another human being, that's a fucking problem.
It is. I
And
mean, it was a problem to begin with, but with that, it's just like, oh, it's just kind of the shit cherry on top of this disaster pie.
yeah,
But
and like that's sort
yeah.
of the first glimpse you get into like the greater part of the story, like other than the prologue in the first volume. That's like the first look at the Twilight Realm that you ever get, and you don't
Mhm.
even really know that that's what that is yet. Nor do you know the whole thing with the character in that, who is, at least at that point in the story, who is unnamed, who is this sort of nameless being who shows up in all of their dreams to sort of taunt them, who's got the weird eye thing going on. And it's just like, oh, this
Mm.
is like the demon
Oh
that's
yeah,
haunting them. And it's like, oh, no, it's actually something else.
it's something that I'm. Well, I guess to not spoil like later on story stuff is just like, oh yeah, that'll most likely be a problem later on,
Yes,
but not now
most
at least.
most definitely. I will say I'll speak. It's the only spoilers I will give will be in the most broad sense, is that the central conflict for Izzy in the third arc is going to be about that vision she has. Is that like that's like what all that is going to be centered around with her, like that part of the story. Thankfully, I have sort of like a goal in mind, an arc for each specific character in each specific segment of the story, and that's her part in that. And I also will say, I won't give too much away about anything beyond that, because I have also confirmed to Luke that not everyone in this story makes it out alive.
Yeah,
Not even side
that's
characters, because if you read Baron's Hollow, you'll know side characters die. But of the seven main characters, I
uh,
have only told Luke in regards to people who will not be there by the end, is that at least one main character will be dead by the end.
and I'm not looking forward to that.
No,
Not
I
a
know you're
fan.
not. I'm not looking forward to writing it, frankly, because I just had to write something that was like it at least approached killing someone, and I was just like, oh god, that was hard. I
Yeah,
didn't
it's
like
like,
that at all.
man, that was a rough time.
That was like that's like some sitting out on your front porch looking at the sunset and smoking a pack of fucking American spirits. You're just
To
like,
just have
oh
the
god.
Guts theme play here, but in real life.
That's I mean that's the Berserk connection. I think I mentioned that to you in terms of the main villain of Children of the Grave. Is that that was definitely a thing? Is that I had taken some huge inspiration from Berserk when I wrote my fantasy novel last year during the pandemic, which is the now currently unreleased but still existing with Twilight as our guide, and that is a like that is a very very comparable piece of work to Berserk in a whole lot of ways. But I also tried to like though I always just love the way Miura wrote characters in that like they always occupied a very obvious archetype, and yet they are like the most intricately written and fascinating version of that archetype as humanly possible. There's
Yeah,
just
they're
like
like the set example rather than just like another equivalent of the archetype.
yes, like and I just I love the way he writes character dynamics. Like the whole Guts Griffith Casca thing is just like that's all you need for a good story. Is you just need to know how
Yeah,
three different characters affect one another and how they bounce off one another and conflict with one another. And it's just like that's what makes storytelling great. And I'm trying to channel that more. Is that it's like Baron's Hollow is a very linear story. It's a very A, B, C. Character does this, does this, does this, and it's very like all the characters in it are very reactive for a lot of the story because it's introducing a lot of things, and then only at the end do they display any kind of agency and they feel the consequences of those actions, but also the things that they earn through them. But Children of the Grave is sort of like a yeah, there are consequences and an A to B point, but also I kind of want to spin my plates a little bit and have people bounce off of each other, and characters who maybe didn't interact a whole lot get to actually have a more fleshed out dynamic this time around since it takes place over more than just like one night. Because Baron's Hollow is like 2 weeks, and most of like volumes 2 through 5 are one night,
just
and
yeah,
Children of the Grave is like an entire semester of school.
yeah, and like I think the big thing that I think works about like Children of the Grave is the fact that it kind of is just letting room for the characters to do develop and interact with each other and breathe because a lot of like as you said a lot of just shit just happens within the span of 2 days in Baron's Hollow, and a lot of Children of the Grave is like trying to kind of just deal with that and live with
Yep.
that while a new conflict is happening. And also, I think that also kind of brings me to a point that I want to make about Volume 4 and why it's
Mm,
probably my personal favorite volume so far of the series is
yes.
that
Love
it's
that.
you get 2 volumes of introduction to these characters and their situation, just weird thing they don't understand. Got a volume of them just having again a Shinji moment, but also like a genuine like okay understanding what our threat is to some extent, even though it
Yeah.
is just kind of like just unimaginable
Oh, yeah.
horror.
This is what this thing can do.
Yeah. Whereas Volume 4 is you get introduced to like the more like explicit fantasy element, but more importantly, these characters actually do react to what is going on and realizing, oh, yeah, we're kind of fucked here, aren't we?
Yep.
What are we supposed to do? And then,
4 is really like the proper beginning of the series in that respect, too. I think
yeah,
it's like that's when all of the situations are set up. It's when, like, oh, it's just like, oh, Izzy was always going to be involved in this in some way or another. It was just kind of a matter of time, and how like everything with Reese and Joey and their relationship, and how they've kind of put this very, very important thing to the side because they didn't want to deal with it, and how it's snuck up on both of them. Um, and just sort of like all the other characters too, and how just like their individual conflicts affect them, is that I kind of wanted that to be the coalescence. It's just like like they all spread out and they all were isolated. Now I need to bring them all together and sort of reel everything back in so that everybody can kind of ground themselves for the final part of it, and so everyone can know where it all stands and
Yeah.
deal with it afterwards.
Yeah, and that's what I think is the strongest element about Volume 4, honestly, is like you have like they come together, they have their moment in the beginning of the first volume where they're like, don't really know each other, not a bit ambiguous as to what everyone's relationship is, whereas Volume 4 is kind of just like we kind of have to come together because this is really they have their we have to come together to try to find out what's going on, but by volume 4 it's like we have to come together because like there isn't anything else we need to do. And I think that's kind of when the characters sort of reveal themselves the most and also kind of find those connections the most, honestly.
Yep.
And also just the development with like Victoria and shit,
Steven.
forget Stephen. Yes,
Yeah.
Stephen, which really love that relationship because it's kind of almost like basically they're kind of chaperones, but they're also like we have no idea what we're doing. These are children.
Yeah, that was one of my like challenges, I guess, is that it's just like Stephen and Victoria, like they set up the kind of framing for the story at the very beginning, and they'll sort of like punctuate parts of those earlier volumes of just like they'll sort of have like a grace note of like, fuck, we there's somebody else here, we gotta figure out what the hell's going on. And they do have sort of an emotional drive with it in that their friend has been killed and that they have to find out who did it and find out, and there's like a greater conspiracy at play that we don't really know the finer details of, that won't get resolved until much later. But they sort of have this interaction and this kind of friendship that I wanted to display, but I only had like a very limited amount of time of them being actually present. So I wanted to sort of display their very real friendship and like without like completely backloading it, which I didn't really succeed at. But like by the time volume 4 is over, I still think you get a good enough look at, or at least by the time volume 5 begins, because you see where Victoria came
Oh
from
yeah.
and when she met Stephen. And because it was just like, I wanted you to care about those two because, the inevitable loss of Stephen is like the emotional focal point of that first part. And it's
Mm-hmm.
the entire impetus for what happens with Victoria and her entire character arc going on. So I was just like, I need to be able to like not to crowbar it in, but I need to make it fit. I need to make these two feel like you care about them at least kind of half as much as you care about the other people. Which
Yeah.
but basically, I'm just like whenever I want to like a character in something, I resort to making them like exceedingly normal. And that's just kind of Steven's bit, is that it's just like he's just kind of a forgetful klutz, and Victoria is just like, if I was not around, you would simply lose your own head. And I find that dynamic quite fun. So I was just like, might as well use that one.
I do genuinely find it really charming, and I think there is kind of like you get the sense of like being like I try to think like a good way to describe it. They're like they're like the people who started off as coworkers, but then realized that they're actually like really cool friends. So
Yep.
it became more than that from then on. Um, and yeah, there's and also just like a lot of stuff with like specific character things that I also just really enjoy in terms of relationships, like Joey and Reese is just kind of like the go-to one because Joey is sort of like the sort of awkward loner character, but like Reese is kind of like the put a pin in this, the I guess kind of a comic relief esque,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
sort of he's cracking one liners, but he has more than just that, obviously. And their dynamic is just wonderful. Izzy and Nadia's dynamic is obviously very wonderful. I really love that moment in Volume 2 where they're like finally kind of like, oh, we're in a shitty situation, but like we kind of can't really avoid how we're feeling about this right now.
Yep.
And it's just like, oh, this is super sweet. Can't wait for this moment to just burn up in flames later
Begins
on.
to drink own tears. It's like, oh goodness.
Yeah, pretty much. And I also just like really enjoy just smaller things about certain characters. Also, just especially in retrospect, like um, Chris, I think,
Mhm.
who is sort of having to discuss to everyone like, yeah, there's something weird here, and we kind of need to do something about it. But he's also like super hesitant. It's like, I can't handle this right now, guys. But we also should do something about it. And everyone's just kind of like, dude, you're looking really stressed.
Yeah, everyone, like, I needed like a character, like I sort of split the sort of the more grounded nature of like characters who would behave a little bit more normally in a situation this absurd, and like you have Leo, who at the very beginning is like the obvious skeptic of what's going on, of just like, okay, I know something's going on, but like fucking what? And then you have Chris, who's just kind of like, he was just kind of like, okay, something's going on, but also like he has like the sort of impression I wanted to make of Chris is that he's somebody who has like a really, really bad problem with like an anxiety disorder, but he's never been put in a place in his life where that's actually ever had to like bother him. So that like he's, because he's such an, also
Yeah.
he's like such a naturally chill guy that he's just like, yeah, I don't really encounter stress, but like the second he encounters like a moment of stress, he just completely falls apart. And that's sort of like his entire
Uh,
thing, is that by Children of the Grave, he's just like, yeah, I mean, I guess we're doing this, and like, I mean, I'm like competent now, but also like I'm freaking out, man.
yeah. Also gonna put a pin in that for when we talk about Children of the Grave, because man, does he ever get a stressful situation?
Oh boy. Yeah,
Hmm.
he I mean, nobody has a good time in Children of the Grave, but you could make a solid case for him having the
Yeah.
worst time. Joey's certainly up
Yeah.
there, but I would say
Well,
that Chris maybe
yeah.
encounters like the most obviously painful path. And you'll see where that
Yeah, like you
results in
can
the
kind
final
of,
part.
yeah.
But he's definitely
Uh,
on a road that he did not previously be on, because it's just, he starts as a character who's, again, he's kind of aimless, he's never really had to worry about anything before, and now you get to see where all of that anxiety and all of that sort of pent up nervousness is now focused on one single thing. And it's like, it would
hmm.
probably drive you fucking crazy, as it is doing to him.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. And speaking of people with bad times, let's talk about Leo.
Oh,
Like,
Leo, my boy.
I, I forgot if I made this joke to you, but I think I described Leo as like the Yamcha of the Those Who Dwell universe, and that he has like not the most utility in terms of the group and also the worst time.
Oh my god, that is a fantastic fucking comparison. I will
Because,
say he has not
yeah,
gotten his complete moment to shine yet, because he is a character
yeah.
who I started off with, and it's just like he's in the position of, he is in unrequited love with somebody who doesn't really feel the same way about him anymore, and he's just sort of like trying to deal with that, and he's emotionally mature, but he's also still a teenager. So it, like, on one hand he's just like, yeah,
Mhm.
I know Nadia and I are not going to get back together, and on the other hand he's just like, well, I still love her, so I mean fucking, I can't do anything about that. And then now that he's got
Yeah.
kind of a goal in mind, and now that he's more focused as a character, and that he's like really put himself into something, and that he's kind of separated from the group throughout the entirety of Children of the Grave, it's just like he's isolated, but at the same time he kind of makes an unexpected friend in the form of Ace, and he also just kind of like learns to make the best of a bad situation. Like, because I think the thing I was worried about with Children of the Grave was that it was just like, it's dealing with the fallout of what happens in Baron's Hollow. It's dealing with like all of the ramifications of the
Mm.
fact that they live completely different lives, and that they've experienced this horrifying thing. And I didn't want to make it like, I mean, obviously it was horrible. It was a demon, it was a monster, and they almost died. But I didn't want to make it like too
Yeah.
overbearing, if that makes sense. Is that like, I didn't want the result of it to
Yeah,
be
you didn't want
fully
just
negative.
yeah, you didn't necessarily just want like 9 volumes of holy fuck, we almost died, but like you want it to at least feel like, characters are experiencing like some semblance of like sort of distressing emotion that they have to deal with. Like um
Just
this
constant
is a
misery
weird
really wouldn't be that compelling.
Yeah, I'm gonna make like the weirdest comparison, but only because it's
So,
something that I finished with a friend recently. Um, I watched my friend play Kingdom Hearts recently,
hmm.
and let me tell you, that last game, there's like a bunch of really bad things that happen, and then the
Uh-huh.
characters are just like,
Well,
cool. That was a thing that happened, but then again, it's also not fair to say that because uh,
hey,
freaking,
it's funny you say that though,
but yeah,
because
no,
like the first thing I ever wrote in middle school was like so derivative of Kingdom Hearts, you wouldn't even fucking believe it. And it was part of the reason why it was a fucking disaster. But I mean, I was also 12, so whatever. But like it's just odd to think about how this could all be traced back to that in a weird way.
it's like it's like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, but with like literary influence.
Yeah.
uh,
Tetsuya Nomura.
what a
Thanks.
man,
What a
what a
man.
man.
What a man. What a writer. But oh fuck, what were we talking about in like a greater point?
We were talking about Leo having a bad time, but how he
Oh,
eventually kind of becomes really cool. But we will not necessarily get into the details of because that's a discussion for the next arc, which
mhm.
will be later on. But the thing I find really interesting and kind of endearing about Leo as a character is the fact that all this terrible stuff happens to it, and like by all accounts, he kind of deals with it pretty well. Like in
Mhm.
comparison to how like everyone else has been dealing with like their own thing, he's like, I, you know, had to split with my girlfriend. Found out my girlfriend was dating someone that was part of my friend group. Um, Freaking my arm got cut off, but I'm doing all right, I guess, for the most part.
He also debatably comes from like from the worst home life. It's like, yeah, he lives with his brother who takes very good care of him. But also he kind of lives with the guilt of knowing that his brother basically sacrificed his own life to be able to have him live well. And his parents were horribly physically and emotionally abusive to both of them. So he's kind of like he's just a really tough person, even though it doesn't really like show. It's just that he's been through so much, is that it's just like, you have somebody like Joey who's obviously like he had this one incredibly traumatic thing happen to him, and it was like it's kind of like Chris in that respect, is that it's just like he's just kind of lived his life and gone about, and then this one thing has just kind of defined his existence for the past 2 years, and now
Mm-hmm.
he's just having to deal with that, whereas Leo is just like, well, I mean, my background, I've just kind of lived with this shit. And some characters are just inherently more hardened, like Mary's kind of sheltered, so they don't really grow up in an environment that allows them to be able to deal with things well. But like people who come from like a background of like they had to deal with more shit, like Izzy and Nadia, who had both lost their parents, and they're just like
Mm-hmm.
having to deal with that kind of shit. But like they aren't miserable all the
Yeah,
time.
yeah, they are at a very understandable and reasonable amount of misery, considering that they are literally teenagers
Yeah.
and have kind of the weight of a fucking cataclysmic event on their shoulders.
And that's just sort of how it feels like when you're a fucking histrionic teenager who doesn't know what they're fucking doing and is in high school, and it's like your entire world rests on your shoulders and you never think you're going to get out of there, and every day of school feels like it's 90 hours long. It's like that's just how everything feels, and I kind of wanted to do my best to channel that, because like I knew a lot of people who had very horrible, horrible things happen to them, and you didn't see them moping around the hallway all day. It's like, no, they were kids, and they learned to exist despite that, even though they clearly did have their problems also. But that's just how
Yeah,
people are.
and I think with the element of it being like perspective storytelling, like POV of one character, like you get the sense of the internal struggle emphasized much, not as much as like, oh, I'm just having the worst time, like just don't know how to handle this. You get it more from the internal like dialogue rather than necessarily just like the action. But like when action does show that, it has more meaning in terms of that. It's like, oh, this character is strong even though that they are just kind of at a low point, but like, there's even points where it can go lower than that.
Yeah,
But
as the later points in the story definitely demonstrate.
yeah. Uh Good times.
Everybody's having a great time. It's great. It's great.
Uh
It's great. It's great.
I remember I made the joke to you. I think I made the joke to you at one point where it's like, the ending is gonna be that everyone is fine and Joey's happy now and nothing terrible is ever gonna happen ever again, right?
Ooh.
And then
Yep,
it just
sure.
like got that awkward response and it's like, yeah, I thought so.
Yeah, well, I
Uh,
mean, I know how everything will end in this arc, well, in every arc really, but and like overall, so it's just like it's interesting hearing you like talk about like what you want versus what the reality will end up being, and I'm just like, hmm, interesting.
yeah, and to me, it's sort of like I joke about it to a certain extent, but I'm also like, well, I mean, that is the story. That's how this has been playing out. It's not like, oh, I just want everything of this to now suddenly be good for everyone because that's totally how the
Look,
story is supposed to
that's a
develop.
sign that I'm doing at least something right because if you care enough to get mad at me, then I did it right.
I describe it as like I'm trying to think of like a good analogy. I'd say like hitting my hand with a rock, saying "ow," and it's like, but I want to do that again. Just keep doing it. Where it's like it's painful, but for some reason I find like genuine investment and enjoyment out of it.
Hey, you have to be as when you're as invested in fiction as we are. I feel like you have to be a masochist on some level, is because it's like because what is every story? It's always conflict, it's always drama, and you're probably going to gravitate towards the things that make you feel that conflict and drama the strongest. So, in a way, you want to put yourself through some form of emotional torture. That's why my favorite thing in the world is Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, which is notorious for having a fourth episode that entirely shatters your soul.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
All the memes. They're always about Nina. Love it. Love
I was
it.
like 8 when I saw that, and I was like, I'm too young to handle this.
Yeah, I was 11 and I had to go think about shit for a while. I was just like, oh
uh,
my God.
what
Oh
a
man.
time!
What a time.
What a time! But
Hopefully I can issue that exact feeling in someone else maybe one day.
I feel like the like I get a sense like the more that the story continues on with all these arcs that there'll probably be a moment that just like for whatever reason just hits me like a oh I literally am just gonna go sit on my bed for an hour.
Yeah, I won't lie. There's definitely some like, especially in because I'm an emotional person, so I put emotions to the forefront of everything, and that's sort of what I try to never lose sight of. But it's like that final arc is gonna be hard to write, just because I'm like, all right, what is going to be the most difficult thing I can do here? And I'm keeping very tightly lipped about that, just because I've like obviously I don't want to spoil things, but it's like with the ending in particular, I'm just very much like if I manage to pull this off, this will totally be like the best thing I ever make if I pull it off. Big if,
Yeah.
but it'll definitely be interesting just because I don't think a lot of people will. Maybe some people will put it together, but I definitely haven't let on the true nature of how the story is going to rightfully conclude. But
Hmm.
it's a story that in a weird way has like two endings, because like the fourth arc is going to be like the ending of the plot, and the fifth arc is kind of like the ending of the characters, if that makes sense. It's
Ah,
like a little bit of
yeah,
character and plot stuff, but like if I had to broadly explain it, that's kind of what it is.
I get you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. Well, I think with like since we're kind of discussing the ending, do you have anything else that you would like to say about at least this arc that maybe we haven't brought
Ah,
up?
in terms of which one, Baron's Hollow or Children? I forget.
We are currently talking about Baron's Hollow.
Okay. In terms of Baron's Hollow, I think the biggest thing that pervaded like the theme I was trying to tackle was death, and
Hmm.
it's obvious because it's like, oh, somebody does die at the end, but it's also like I always felt that coming of age stories, and I felt this the most strongly in like things like It and Stand by Me, in that um is that the moment you start to grow up is also really the moment you acknowledge that you're going to die. And that's sort of when you become a teenager, that's when you really start to think about that on an existential level. And like that to me has always been the most terrifying thing ever. Like dying is like my number one fear. And so I think my struggle to create something in that year that I started Those Who Dwell was sort of like me reveling in this sort of futility of just like I'm trying to do this one thing, and I feel like I am going to die without ever having done it. And I sort of did
Mm.
this to counteract that. But at the same time, all these characters are like going through these things, and like their lives are sort of kickstarting, and then they are immediately met with the possibility of dying and having to put themselves on the line. And I also think it's just too because a lot of people in our generation are thrust with the consequences of things we did not ask for. And I think that's a really big theme of the entire story of just like nobody deserved this. Nobody, like, all of this conflict and all of this drama and all of this pain is things that were put on to us unfairly by people who we had nothing to do with. And now we just have to sit and we have to kind of take it. And that sucks. And I kind of wanted to convey the amount of weight that that is, but I also didn't want to be like, oh, this is so overbearing that it's just going to crush us and kill us. Is that like, I want to balance as best I can the reality of acknowledging death, but also the reality that it's not the absolute, that it's not just that, that there's not things we can do to sort of to combat that. So I try to balance the light and the dark as best I can. I'm obviously going to dip into being saccharine because I am insanely saccharine, but I am also incredibly cruel. So instead of a balance, I might just be incredibly fucking mixed. But that's just sort of what I think it's about. And like I think having your characters confront the possibility of death before they go on this big long journey is the best way to sort of imbue a sense of tension in your story. And
Mhm.
like it's I mean it's like Full Metal Alchemist. It's like the most traumatic thing that happens in that story is at the very beginning, and then that's sort of like just the rest of the story is completely contextualized by that. So this is my beginning that everything sort of builds from. So it's about a lot of things, but that's mainly what it is.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I think it's kind of I do especially like the point that you're making of it's a situation that they never really asked for, but they're just having to find a way to make something better of it to a certain
Yep.
extent, and which I mean, it can be sort of seen as a lot of things, but within the story of this, it's let's fucking kill the big demon man that is kind of ruining our town right now.
Yep. And I wanted to sort of also just be like, is they don't really have a lot of agency in their situation in Baron's Hollow until like the very end. But the place where they do have agency is at the very beginning because all of them unanimously agree to go and fight and kill this thing. And I was kind of just sort of like, I wanted to show that all of these people who are different and have these different backgrounds and different relationships and are completely different from one another in so many different ways, they also just sort of feel this responsibility and this call to action to be like, yeah, we didn't ask for this, but also if we ignore it, then like everything's fucked and we can't let that happen. So there is an inherent heroism to all of that. And I feel like that sort of speaks to how I view at least my friends as being people who are inherently very if the world is the unstoppable force, then they are the immovable object, and that's why I
Mm.
respect and love them. And that's just sort of the feeling that I have with them, is that I treat the characters like I would treat friends. Or, well, I mean, I obviously wouldn't do the things to them that I would my friends. That would make me the worst friend on planet fucking Earth. But
I see it kind of as like you're right, the terrible situations that you put the characters in, but you are not like, oh yeah, you're just putting them as objects for horrific situations. You're like you
yeah,
feel empathy
no,
for them in those
is
situations.
that I care about them and that I want them. It's that like I will inevitably, if they fail, then I will write them to fail. But if I do that, I'm going to do it clawing tooth and nail through the dirt and being like, fuck, I don't want this, but I'm going to do it anyway because that's what happens.
Yeah, that's how the logic of the story was most likely will progress for a
Yep.
situation like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Alrighty then. And I think with that, I think that at least kind of concludes discussion of Baron's Hollow. I kind of am just splitting up like this just because I feel like people who are like, "Oh, I just finished Baron's Hollow. I want
Mhm.
to listen about that specifically." And
Good
then we
idea.
can kind of get into Children of the Grave,
Mhm.
which is a much lengthier, kind
Affair.
of not as like specific as like the prologue, but there's a lot of interesting things going on, a lot of big developments going on that are
Mhm.
interesting to talk about. Like just a lot of shit changes. A lot of shit changes from that point on that we've already sort of discussed. Like the fact that everyone is learning that they have magical powers.
Yep.
That's a pretty major
Yeah,
element.
that was always a difficult thing. I was just like, I tend to gravitate towards like I'm of two minds of like having mechanics like that in your universe. If you listen to August and I's anime podcast, you will probably know this ahead of time, but it's like I like either an explanation that is so detailed and so specific that I understand every single part of it and how it works and how it affects everything to the point where it's like mathematical, or I like something that is basically vague enough to be ignored, but also like still useful enough to be relevant. If anything in the middle ground just frustrates me because to write at least. So I kind of erred on the side of caution and what was something a little bit more vague, even though I definitely set up a lot of mechanics and how those things can be exploited and moved around. And I did a lot of changing over, like, I didn't really know how it would all work in between the story. And I just sort of arrived at the conclusion of like, basically, everybody has a sort of level of innate energy and they all have the same amount of it. It's just how they use it that makes them different slash more powerful, which, you know, I totally didn't steal from Yoshihiro Togashi's Hunter x Hunter, but I partially did.
Don't
Um,
tell anybody.
but that's sort of like the thing that I wanted to do is that like one of the problems in a lot of stories, like shonen stories specifically, that which honest to God, those who dwell in the dark kind of um, is they have the power creep problem of they are or like Dragon Ball or Bleach, where the characters are constantly getting stronger, and that's like the appeal is that you see these people grow and change, and they go from A to B, and it's like, wow, look at how they transformed. And then you just get to a point where the story goes on for long enough, and they hit a ceiling, and they just can't get any more powerful, and it becomes impossible to write compelling fiction for them. And I'm like, well, how do I solve that? I'm like, well, what if everyone, just basically everyone, has the same amount of power, more or less, but like, you know, demons will probably have more than normal humans. Hunters will have more than normal humans too, but like not less than a demon or whatever. But like basically just like I'll do it in a sense of like you just use it as an extension of who you are. It's like if you're creative enough, you'll be able to use it in a really interesting way. If not, you can just make yourself stronger, or you can just like put it in a weapon, or this or that and the other thing. And it's just like it allows me ease, but it also lets me like use it in ways that might be indicative of some people's characters. And I get to do that a lot more with the story going forward. But that's sort of something I tried to do occasionally here.
Yeah, I think there's especially some really fun moments with like just how that power kind of is affecting like the characters in terms of like how they're using it and trying to understand it, because like some of the characters kind of gravitate to it pretty easily, and then some characters are like this is just a very big struggle for them, and I think it kind of also is very revealing of their characters in a lot of ways. Like um I'm trying to think of like one in specific. I think it was with character Nova, not
Mm.
Mary. So for people who've read
Yes.
um
Um,
um
I
that
felt
that
a
last
little bad
arc.
about saying it. Is that technically Mary is Nova's dead name? She goes and like you know the in the first sort of arc, uh, you know Mary is a character who questions their identity very consistently. And then in Children of the Grave, it's because they realize that they are some shade of trans or non-binary. They don't really know. And they're just like, okay, I don't really feel like Mary Sayer is who I am. So I want you to, you know, here's my new name, they, them pronouns pretty much. And um, I want to go by this. And that's sort of the impetus for change with Nova as a character is sort of that sort of path of self-discovery and the sort of acceptance that they go through with Chris, Nadia, and Izzy specifically sort of being like a pillar of support for that part of their identity. And that kind of manifests in a way is that like her like having that connection to Chris makes her grow into being Nova, and it lets her access power that she maybe wasn't as in tune with because her anxiety was sort of like clouding her mind.
Yeah, there was more going on like mentally than there was like within just her actual abilities. That was kind of just like blocking it in some semblance of way.
Yeah, and that sort of support is what is able to make them be like their power never changes, but they sort of harness it in a way. It's like if I enhance my reflexes enough, it doesn't matter how strong I am. I can just play defense so hard that my opponent can't fucking do anything. And that's what
Yeah,
makes them valuable as a fighter. It's like they discover their niche once they like finally get themselves. It's kind of like a, you know, not to say that I put this much thought into or anything, but it's like kind of like a Buddhist thing where the energy is, it comes from not like strength but stability. That's kind
mm-hmm.
of what it's about.
It makes me think of that thing that they talked about like in Avatar a little bit was like the your pool of chakras as being blocked and you need to clear
Yeah,
out the emotional
gook.
the gook. Yeah,
Yep.
something like that. And also, as a little aside, I think it's all right that we referred to Nova as Mary for the last arc,
Yeah.
considering it's a spoiler. It's a spoiler,
Yeah, that I didn't want
basically.
to put. Yeah, it's a very important discovery, and it's like of course, I'm still going to refer to. It's like if I refer to Nova as Mary, it's probably talking about them in the context of those first 5 or 6 volumes, where they still go by Mary, so it's just kind of easier to refer to it that way. So but
Yeah,
that is what happens. Um, and that particular journey was pretty important for me to make. It's like I had already realized that I was non-binary before I wrote this, but like getting to use them as a particular cipher to explore how it felt, specifically through somebody who was not born assigned with the same gender as mine, was a particularly liberating experience, I found. And that made that hit home for me, just like writing it. And I'm glad that I got the opportunity to do that, just because it's not something in fiction that you see very often.
mm-hmm.
And it
And yeah,
affects the character in like a mechanical way too. So it's
yeah. It's
all.
not just like random personal thing that is about the character. Like there is like you can see it in their action that it is developing something within them that is not
Yeah,
just
that was
that.
my goal with Children of the Grave too, is that it was just like I didn't want internal and external conflict to be separate in any way. I wanted everything that happened to have a feasible impact on what was going to happen later.
Mhm. Yeah. And also, just a quick aside, just because I feel like ranting about it, but I am very much a big fan of
Please.
Nova as a character. Very, very
Yes.
much a big fan of Nova as a character.
One
And
of my favorite characters that I mean, like, I love all of them, obviously, but like, I have a special love for some of them and more than others. But like, Nova in this arc particularly has just been a real treat to be able to write.
honestly, and it was especially kind of interesting for me because I had to, like as you were saying, you were kind of learning more as you were writing your own stuff, and
Mhm.
I had the same experience with reading it, and I was like, oh, I feel this on a very extreme level, and I don't know why.
Hmm.
Hmm. Is this implying something?
Does this mean something? And I am very glad that I was able to assist with that in any way, shape, or form. I mean, that's my fucking goal, is just to do that with what I do. So I mean, like, I already feel like I've succeeded, and I haven't even fucking finished the goddamn story yet. So,
To quote my friend, you've infected me with the NB.
oh no, not the envy virus. We're all contagious. Oh
Super
geez.
contagious.
Oh
Uh
geez.
oh no. But
And that's sort of something that I viewed interestingly, because I kind of inherently link that to the broader perspective of the characters who aren't explicitly human. Is that something that really fascinated me, at least like conceptually, that I wanted to write and explore through it, was the idea of people having a broader view of existence and like life and like basically knowing that all of this other stuff is happening definitively and being alive for so long, like these characters who are like several centuries old, and how that would basically fundamentally alter how you saw and viewed everything. Because like the hunters
Mhm.
as an organization, this isn't really a spoiler because it's alluded to, is that they are basically like, at least on a social level, they are like entirely accepting of people who are like gay or trans or whatever. It's just like, as long as you can fight, we don't fucking care. And it's like
Mhm.
they've all been alive for so long, and there's so many different people from so many different cultures that these views just sort of permeate everything. And like anyone who doesn't coincide with those views eventually is alive long enough to the point where it doesn't matter to them anymore. So
Mhm.
that sort of like perspective I always thought was interesting, and I was just like, that's a good avenue to be able to explore something like this.
Mhm. I do find that kind of interesting because yeah, like they're the organization isn't as much like concerned about those elements of like the people that they have. It is funny though that it's like our emphasis is can you kill people very well though,
Yeah,
and it's like fair enough.
that's the sort of thing with the hunters, is that it's just like, at like on the one hand it's like, I don't want to take anything that's too ambitious or too complicated that will be too much for me to handle in the end, but at the same time, the idea of moral ambiguity has always fascinated me. And another like omnipresent influence on me, as I alluded to earlier, was Yoshihiro Togashi's Hunter x Hunter, which is a story that is basically entirely about moral shades of gray and how nothing is black and white and how the world is way too complicated for all of that shit. And it's just like playing the long game with that. And like I didn't want to go for that specifically, but it's like I want to sort of build up the fact that the hunters aren't necessarily, at least like our view of them right now is that it's like they're the good guys, but also they've done some really fucked up stuff. And like in the second half
Yeah,
of the story, it's like, oh, these guys are like really kind of like they're kind of bad. I mean, like they don't like
yeah.
they definitely fight in the name of good, but they do some heinous shit.
It's like you're the message that you are trying to support is pretty good, but dear God, ugh.
And
Like I especially find that whole thing with like, oh, if they find out that like certain
yeah,
people know about the organization, we're literally just gonna murder all of you and be like,
it's like we'll murder them and erase their memories, and it's like,
what?
oh, okay. And like that's another interesting thing that I can't wait to explore with the next arc, is sort of in exploring the internal politics of that entire system and how it's like I allude a lot to the background of it in one of the later volumes in Children of the Grave, in terms like the history of how the leader of the organization, Anna, came into power. And it's basically because the previous leader of the Hunters became so old and paranoid and crazy, he became like basically a fucking crypto fascist. And some weird shit happened
Ooh,
that we don't know about, that like it's real mysterious and shady, but we no spoilers. But then it was like some awful shit happened, and then she challenged him to trial by combat and fucking killed him. And so she's having to deal with the
oh
fact
no.
that for like 400 years, everyone in her society has been following this dude, and there are still people who are loyal to him, but there are also people who are loyal to her. And she's trying to balance the public opinion so that like nobody challenges her rule, but also so that like she wants people to like her, but she also wants to be respected, and she obviously isn't viewed in the same light as her predecessor. So that's going to be something that's really fun to explore, because I really like Anna as a character. And we haven't seen a lot of her yet. She's just sort of
No, yeah.
been in the background. I will say one of the many spinoffs that I have planned for things in this universe is the backstory of Anna and those first generation of hunters, that
Mm.
like that were like there weren't that many of them, and it started the organization, and that like sort of explains the backstory of both her and the main villain of the series, Erebus, and sort of how they collide and what have you.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
yeah, that's going to be fun.
Yeah, I that's one thing I've been enjoying is like it's not been just, you know, super in-depth stuff, but just like little bits and details of just like, oh, there's a whole bigger lore and world that we're just kind of getting more or less like cliff notes and
Yep.
tiny things about that I'm assuming will probably be much more present within the
Yeah.
next
I wanted to
arcs.
give enough to be interested, but also not enough to be like, so that like I still want to be able to answer lots of questions. And there's obviously a lot of plot reveals and twists that'll happen within that. Like one of the big unanswered questions so far is still, it's just like, what's the fucking deal with this fucking spy thing? Like, who let
Hmm.
the villain from Baron's Hollow into Baron's Hollow in the first place? And why can't we find out who this is? And is there a traitor amongst them? And if so, who the fuck is it?
Yeah,
So, lots of things, lots of things.
there's definitely a lot of things going on there, and um, I think I think now is kind of probably a good time to get more into just like individual character
Mm,
things, which I think since we're still on the topic of just sort of the lore and stuff, I think would be a good time to talk about kind of the villain of this arc
mm.
specifically. Um, I don't know how to pronounce the name
Thanatos.
properly. Thanatos. Okay, for some reason I was like, is it Thanatos?
At least I've heard it as Thanatos. It's I use lots of mythology names, and that's the Greek god of death.
Mm,
Mainly because like, and I didn't want to use it in like a surface level way, but I wanted to do it in like demons, at least in the lore of this particular universe, had basically always existed in tandem with humanity, and for like most of their existence basically ruled as kings and emperors and pharaohs and like all of these different forms of rulers. And that's why subjugation has existed, and like slavery, and like all of these different forms of like basically all of the like class exploitation throughout the history of mankind is basically because they were able to exploit an unfair power dynamic
mm,
that humans were naturally susceptible to. And so the reason that they have so many branching mythologies and belief systems and what have you is because these weird demonic entities did actually exist. And so like Thanatos probably got their name because when like from somebody who was like their parents maybe were like demons who were lived in like Athens, Greece or something. And
mm.
maybe that name was significant to them. And that's why some of the other demons are named after Egyptian mythology, and some of them are named after this and that. It's because I love that stupid shit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a good explanation for it because it's like, okay, that seems actually pretty plausible that, maybe they just kind of came across the name not as much as like, oh, they knew exactly what it meant, but it was just a name that they gravitated towards that was used at that time. And
Yeah.
yeah, now with, then the story, it's like, oh, that's a bit on the nose,
Yeah.
but it's also like,
And I feel like I wanted to sort of like start out Thanatos as being a character who's just like who seems really on the nose and seems really obvious, and then the longer the story plays out, the more you realize there's more to them, because that's the thing that I wanted to like. Children of the Grave is basically it's an expansion, it's elaboration. I wanted to take everything and make it bigger. I wanted to take everything and make it a little bit more dense, a little bit more complicated. Um, and that extends to the villain too, because the villain in Baron's Hollow was very strictly a functional villain. It was a villain who was like existed to be a scary monster. There wasn't a whole lot to their
yeah,
character.
like their depth was just to be an obstacle and not as
Mm-hmm.
much of like a character.
And I wanted to, since I like moral ambiguity, I guess it's just like, I didn't want it to be just a conflict of, good versus evil. And it's just like, you have demons. When you hear that, it's just like you inherently associate it with negativity. And my query, I guess, is more like, okay, what if like demons were just like a species of like beings, and they were like
Yeah.
mostly morally neutral, and they were just sort of engendered in this particular way to sort of be these very animalistic and sort of brutal creatures that kind of depend on this kind of Darwinian style evolution to be able to become powerful. And I wanted Thanatos to be like the emblem of that sort of Darwinian mindset that they would have
Mm.
when they viewed strength. And I was just like, I wanted them to both serve the purpose of being an exceptionally violent, very formidable character who was both intelligent and incredibly competent, and also someone who was smart enough to know their limitations and had kind of a method to their madness. Because it's like,
Mhm.
you could just have somebody just like, oh, I just want to kill the kids and like fulfill my role. And it's like, that does kind of work, but it's like, we don't know a whole lot about Erebus, the main villain right now. A little bit,
Yeah, there's been some
Of
reference, but nothing like major that even necessarily indicates like, oh, this is like going to be big main bad guy that is the main mastermind of everything.
yeah.
Just
In many respects, I think
introduced.
my goal with Thanatos 2 was to like they say the best way to sort of make a conflict interesting between your heroes and your villains when you write a story is to, give them defined similarities and to have them be like the same character but with a different methodology that makes them fundamentally at odds. And I sort of tried to take Thanatos and be like, I'm going to put a little bit of every single character in like every main character in this story and imbue that in them in one way or another. It's like
Mhm.
Thanatos is a character who is fundamentally genderless, which is a similarity to Nova.
Mhm.
They are currently their sort of main character motivation is a sense of like trying to make up for the fact that they had failed in the past and that they had like failed their leader, but like get sort of a second chance because they have
Mhm.
like a deep held respect for their superiors, much like Victoria, how she sort of views herself as a failure and how she lost someone important to her. And now she's trying to sort of bounce back from that and prove her worth, improve her mettle, and prove that she is the powerful, competent person that she can be. And there's also things like, there's the underlying anxiety that Thanatos has of failure that's very present in characters like Chris. And in sort of, there's a similarity to the sort of distance and abandonment that Thanatos feels and the way that they deal with trauma and negativity that Joey and Reese both did. Joey and
Mhm.
Reese both sort of dealt with the most traumatic thing that happened to them, the death of their best friend. Is they sort of dealt with that in an unhealthy way by kind of compartmentalizing it and trying to ignore it and trying to basically build up their defense and not be vulnerable and open and honest with themselves and with each other. And Thanatos is like the nightmare version of that, where they build
Yeah,
up so many barriers and they build up all of these things that it's allowed them to basically become a sociopath. It's like that they are a normal, it's like underneath it all, they're a normal person with empathy and feelings and all of this, but through the cruelty they've endured and through the way they've dealt with everything, being alive for 100 years, having to kill people, having to do all of this, having to like absorb all of these memories from the prey that they eat, they have
Mhm.
to, it's like you can either live with the guilt of being a monster or you can be a monster. And they choose the
Yeah,
latter because that's the easier choice.
yeah.
And
It's what's easier for them to deal with.
that's sort of like harkening back to the sort of character idea of them originally is that there's sort of a core to all of the main seven that they are fundamentally kind of heroic. They choose to be involved and they choose to have agency in their situation. And the fundamental difference between a lot of them and between Thanatos is that Thanatos chooses to be a monster and they choose to be human. It's like, it's not necessarily a thing that is like, it's not necessarily like a species thing. It's like
Mhm.
humanity isn't something that you are born as, it's something that you earn. And that's sort of like
Yeah,
the underlying message, I think, of this part of the story.
honestly, that's actually a pretty interesting way to put it that I'd never even considered. But I think like from everything with that character in specific is like that is a pretty strong thematic thing because I remember the major line at least in volume 8 that I won't I don't I think I'll mention because it's not necessarily a spoiler, but it was something
I
like
think I know the
along
line too.
yeah the like oh the when you have a scar the the skin that comes back is like stronger than before, and Thanatos' methodology is basically like I'm just going to become like covered in scars to become more like durable
Yep.
emotionally and
That is
physically.
the like thematic crux of the series. Like when I wrote that, I was just like, this is what it is. This is the thing.
It's that.
It's haha, there it is. But yeah, I mean, like, it's not like I want to pigeonhole it as one thing. It's a couple of things, but like that's the main thing I wanted to do is I wanted to take somebody who was like fundamentally evil, but I also wanted to kind of reflect who they were and sort of explain how they are the way they are. And also give you a window into the main villain a little bit, and you can see sort of a little bit of his motivation shining through. But mainly, I like Thanatos has been one of my favorite characters to write, just because they are like exceptionally gleeful in how like they take a like great pleasure in the pain that they dish out. But I think the key one of the key relationships at least has been sort of the development between I know this is a spoiler section, but there's one particular relationship that's it's a very big spoiler. But let's just say that there's a central character, and they come into Thanatos. They sort of like interact with them in a way, and they have this very strange relationship where you sort of think that Thanatos is trying to manipulate them, and they are. But they also view, because Thanatos' worldview is so like skewed and fucked, it's like, yeah, I'm manipulating you, but also I'm helping you. Like this is something that will make you like me, and it will make you durable and strong, and you'll be able to survive because the ulterior is just being weak. And I liked writing that just because it was an interesting way to go about exploring that, because when I decided to write a villain like that, I was like, that's sort of what I want the point of it to be, is that being open and honest and vulnerable with people you trust is a fundamental part of being a human being. You have to do it, and it's hard. Um, but then there's the ulterior, which is building walls, separating yourself from people, and turning yourself into this single-minded thing that can't feel pain because they can't feel anything. And like right as I started to write Children of the Grave, um, it was off the heels of I was involved in a very unfortunate toxic relationship that really fucked me up for a while, and that was sort of my mentality when I exited, because I was so emotionally vulnerable and raw from it, is that I was just like, I would rather feel nothing than risk feeling like this again. And sort of that sort of emotional conflict that I felt, I was just like, I eventually realized that was no way to live. And I was like, that's a cool thing to explore through this. And I think I'll try to channel that a little bit. So that was sort of partially where that character sort of found their inception.
Yeah, I'd say that's kind of like an example of just like finding an experience and seeing like, oh, this is actually something kind of valuable, like
Yeah.
experience that I should channel through in the storytelling.
Yeah.
Because it was, for me, reading chapter, or not chapter, but volume 8, it was like those themes are very present and very, it's a case where it's like I don't necessarily think it's exactly subtle about it, but it is very much just like it impacts the way it should, and is probably like genuinely like one of my favorite volumes of the Children of the Grave arcs so far. There's just so much good stuff with that. Honestly, again, we can't really
Yeah.
say
It
specifics,
was
but
it was both difficult to write and immensely gratifying to write. So I'm glad to hear that that pays off. And that is definitely one thing about my writing that I am like 100% about, is that it's like I am the most phenomenally unsubtle writer of all time. I like, if you are looking for something that is very tempered or measured, you will not find it with me. I am insanely emotional and histrionic, and that is just the way that I am. But I like to think that that grants a certain interiority to the things that I do, just because it's like, that's who I am. I feel things quite strongly, and if that's not your bag, then that's not your bag, and I totally understand. But like, you can also, I know a lot of people who would get on board with it. So apples and oranges, not an inherently negative thing, but also it's like, I've never really been into stories that are like, not that even that I'm like this super broad writer or anything, but it's like I've never been into stories that are very like careful or like measured. I'm really interested in things that are like super broad and ambitious, because when you are broad and ambitious, you're messy. And when things are messy, you can find something really valuable in that mess. And
yeah,
that's just like sort of the ethos that I have, of just like everything great that I love on some level is a mess. And I try, and I feel like that's to some extent what I am doing too.
yeah. Sorry about the alarm there. For me, like I very much agree with that mentality, because I think it's also just like sometimes, you can have the most like well-oiled machine kind of story going in, but it can feel like, with the use of the analogy of well-oiled, it can feel like a machine,
Yeah.
not actually something. Whereas like something messy is you feel like the humanity and sincerity behind it.
We
Like,
also live in the most phenomenally unsubtle world ever now. So I almost
yeah,
feel like it almost feels fitting in a way. It just kind of feels prescient. Make of that
yeah,
what you will. But
yeah,
yeah, I really loved writing villains a lot more definitively in this arc, especially because um, a lot of inspiration and like a lot of ways, one of the most defining experiences I've had with fiction to go back to inspirations is a particular arc of Hunter x Hunter called the Chimera Ant arc, which is very much focuses on the humanity of its villains. And that was something where I was just like, I want to portray these people as people. I don't really want there to be that much of a difference between, like, the only difference between demons and humans in my universe is that their biology is different. It's
mhm.
like in terms of like mindsets, they're exactly the same. And that's what makes that conflict interesting to me, is that there's not a fundamental proclivity towards one thing or another. It's like, the hunters might say otherwise, but it's like, you see those flashbacks to Erebus and Thanatos, and it's just like they're just normal people. They just happen to also possess like the ability to fucking shapeshift and stuff.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much. And that's kind of where like it's like the like kind of like the sincerity behind those characters, or it's not about this, oh, it's subtle in like the moral ambiguity. It's the very much the sincerity of just these characters are doing horrible things and they think they're right, but there is something kind of deeper going on than
Yep.
just being like, oh, I kill because it's cool. It's like
Yeah.
there's more than just theatrics going on behind those actions.
Yeah, and it's, sometimes your story works with that and sometimes it doesn't. It's like sometimes,
Yeah,
you have a villain who's just like killing people is fun, and it's like that works
it's the
sometimes.
best.
It's the coolest. You should try it.
Killing children is my favorite thing. uh,
Thanatos.
2021. Are you tired of being nice? Don't you just want to go ape shit?
Oh
uh,
my god, your
uh,
meme knowledge comes back once again. Oh
uh,
god, I
it
really
sometimes is helpful.
sometimes
Um,
it is when you want to break down everything into like its simplest part. Here I feel like you could tell, like you could tell the entire story of Children of the Grave with memes, and I would be like, this is perfect, this is better. I can't believe
I,
it.
you know what? You tempt me with this, and maybe I might actually do it.
Oh man, that would be a sight to behold. I won't lie, that would be dope. We'll do another
I'll
Zoom call and do a slideshow. It'll be great.
yeah, it'll basically be like the really badly explained version of those who dwell, and I'll have that image of the domino effect with Chris pissing on a corpse versus
The
fighting.
entire world ending.
Yeah, basically.
Oh
But
no.
also, I think now would probably be a good time, since we kind of touched on some pretty like heavy philosophical stuff, to get more into the just character stuff with,
Yeah.
just fun character stuff. Because the one thing I kind of want to talk about is recent Victoria. Is
Ah,
very
yes,
much love that.
that's always interesting. I think one, like, my girlfriend and I were talking about like the pairing, how like she really enjoyed the beginning, at least, of Victoria, or not Victoria, of Nadia and Izzy's blooming relationship in the very start of that, and how they're sort of like forced to confront their feelings, and how that's kind of a relatable sentiment, that like maybe you would have realized things about yourself earlier if you were in similar circumstances. But she was just like, but she like knew that there was another romantic pairing later, and then I was just like, it's not going to be between who you expect it to be. um and even though recent Victoria definitely have that moment at the very, very, very end of Baron's Hollow where there's definitely like a moment between the two of them
Yeah, it's
where
like a moment.
yeah, and it's just like, but Reese even acknowledges in that moment, it's just like, I'm just a fucking dumb kid. This probably doesn't mean anything. And, but then you have his sort of first chapter in that first volume, and he's just like, oh my God, I'm falling in love. Shit.
Dude's down
Shit.
bad.
He is down bad, but it's just like, I method act these characters in my head and try to figure out what their responses to be. And I was just like, all right, Morgan in this situation would, in no uncertain terms, be head over heels for the cute British girl who could whoop some ass, who suddenly showed up and could and like helped and saved all of them. And I'm just like, and I thought about that, and I was like, what if I ran with that? Because I love the idea of that relationship, is because you know, obviously there's the one thing about it where it's kind of like the Edward and Bella romance in Twilight, where it's like, oh,
Hmm.
this dude's 100 and she's 17. Oh man, that's
Yeah.
a thing. And I always kind of
Uh-oh.
thought that was bullshit personally, because like, not to get on a soapbox to defend Twilight or anything, but is like that series goes out of its way to portray Edward as like an idiot teenager. He's just been an idiot teenager for a very long time, and that's the impression that
Stuck
I
in
want to
that.
give off, is because like, it's not just to have like her have a romance with a younger character. It's fundamentally because the like, once you if you get turned into being a hunter at a young age, because they have to do it at a young age in case you die later on. It's just like, as soon as you can, we got to turn you. Um, so she would be in a state of arrested development for the rest of her life. And I love that idea because it's an interesting thing. It's like, because, when you're a teenager, the inherent thing about being a teenager is like, oh, well, at least you won't be one forever. It's like, well,
Mm,
what if Victoria was 16 years old for 130 years? And she's like, it sucks. And she sort of has that conversation with Reese. She's just like, it's fucking hard. Like, I have to deal with emotions, and I know they're unreasonable, and I know that I feel this way, and shouldn't. And I have all these experiences and memories, but I'm still only able to respond to it in this particular way. And like, it frustrates me. And I love writing the two of them. One, because I just think they're insanely cute.
they are,
It's because
honestly.
Reese is that, like, you sort of referred to him as a comic relief character, but said to put a pin in that. And I
Mhm.
think that that's why writing Reese this time around has been so gratifying for me. It's because it's like, it's showing the inherent strength of being the comic relief character. It's
Yeah.
like, he's still that way at the very end. It's just that like, he's able to handle things in a little bit more of an honest way. It's like, before, humor was a method of deflection for him, and it's like, he can still be funny and all, but it's like, he's not going to be funny when Joey is kidnapped and everything is in the world is going to end. Like,
Yeah.
he's able to
Yeah.
process things a little bit more like a human being, because he's kind of matured a little bit. um Maybe more so than like any other character barring Leo or Mary. But the
Mhm.
fun thing about him and Victoria is just sort of like, I love doing the, like, Victoria is knowledgeable, but hunters don't know everything about the world, so you kind of get to do a little fish out of water thing with her, where she's just like
Yeah.
periodically very bemused by, like, in the first volume, I loved the idea of like, that entire thing was completely spontaneous, because I was like, okay, these people are going to sit down and they're going to show her a movie for the first time. And then I was just like, if you put in like a Blu-ray to someone who has never seen a movie but like vaguely knows what one is, and then they saw the previews, what would they fucking think of that? It's just like,
Yeah.
I don't really understand why this is a completely different story, and there's these new characters there, and it's just like, that's an advertisement. And then it's just like,
Then you have to
oh
explain what the advertisement is,
yeah. And
and
she's just
just
like,
on and on.
yeah, and she's like, capitalism's weird, man. And she's like, and he's
It'd
just like,
be
yes.
it'd be
um
whack.
it do be whack. And I think the real treat, though, it's like, yes, they're cute together, and I think they have genuinely good chemistry, just because they are very like, she's kind of deadpan but also not really. She has like a funnier side to her. I also just like the fact that she is like an insanely stupid drunk. That's just a
Yeah.
very admirable quality in for that. I think my favorite line of hers, like, humorously, that I've written, is just one where they, like, somebody mentions evil, and then she just happens to point out, she goes, I combat evil. And that just cracks me the fuck up for whatever reason. Like she's just sitting there completely off her mind of tequila. But the thing I love about the both of them is that, like, you know, she loses the most important person in her life. And not only is he the most important person in her life, he's like the last important person in her life. Like Steven is her last surviving friend. And she's got this vacuum in her life. And Reese just kind of shows up and naturally sort of fills that vacuum, because he can ground her. And I think that this gets to the heart of something that I also just find particularly emotional, which goes back to another inspiration, which is not really, but like in this very, very specific way. The video game Undertale. I am enamored with a particular part of that game that prompted me putting a particular quote in my bio, because it's maybe the only time where a single sentence has happened in something that like didn't relate to like a plot beat and it made me cry. And that being, have you played the game?
Yes, I have.
Okay,
Yes.
well, it's the very beginning when you're in Toriel's house and you go to that mirror and it just says, "It's you." And it's like, oh, that's cute. I'm sure this won't be the foundation for something earth-shatteringly fucking emotional later in this game. And then you get to the end of the game where you're in, like, you're being told that story, but you go to that same mirror and it says, "Despite everything, it's still you." And that's basically
Yeah.
the entire foundation of Victoria through this entire thing, is because I wanted to explore her interiority, despite the fact that she's not one of the main seven and doesn't get like that first person view that we get. But also, a lot of the third person chapters focus a lot on her. And I wanted to take advantage of the fact that like this really important thing happened to her too. So the thing about her is that it's just like she's constantly trying to like her conversation with Reese at the end of Baron's Hollow is just like, I've seen every friend I've ever had die, and it still makes me feel like shit, and I don't know why. And that's sort of like a kind of a lean into the theme of the Children of the Grave and Thanatos, of just like, I've experienced all these things and I still feel human. And that's the thing, is that Reese is there to sort of ground her and remind her of her just being like, there is a particular line, this is not really a spoiler, but there's in volume 9, the section that I'm writing right now, her and Reese have a conversation, and she says something in reference to when she was still human. She talks about when she like last saw sunrise, and he said, "But you're still human. You've just been human for a very long time." And that's sort of the core of her, is that she just keeps kind of forgetting. It doesn't have anything to anchor her, and she's just kind of like tempted to sort of give in and be like, I could be this person who doesn't make friends with all of you and who doesn't care about all of you and just is like a teacher and is strictly that. But like, I want to give into my emotions because I know if Steven were still here, he would want that for me. He wouldn't want me to turn into this emotionless husk. So she's got sort of that spurring her on, and Reese spurring her on. And that kind of encourages her to sort of conquer her internal inadequacy. She feels like she was promoted to her position just because of what happened with Steven. And it's revealed later on that that's kind of what happened. And so that gives her, in my opinion, further incentive to want to be like, to really earn her title, so that she's just like, oh, that didn't just happen. Like, I want to fucking deserve being a lieutenant. And that's why I like her, is because she's so determined and she gets knocked down all the time. And Reese is the only person who she feels comfortable exposing her complete and utter vulnerability to. She's trying to prove herself, and she's trying to prove that she's this strong person that can be relied on, but that takes its toll on her. So she's like, I will be open with Reese so I can sort of maintain that balance of being a teacher and being a guardian, but also being an emotionally vulnerable person, like, and not keeping everything in. And that sort of conflict in her is really fun to explore. And I really like that. And she's just a very like sprightly and kind of upbeat character. She's a lot like Leo in the sense that like she gets knocked down, but she stands up every single time after it. Like, she's just kind of got this unconquerable spirit about her. And I admire it a lot. I long to adopt that attitude one day.
Maybe
But
one day.
and that's just, I love being able to write them. One of the freedoms of having a story that's taking place over the entire summer and the entire fall is that you get to write them in like slice of life situations. Like they get to go to the mall,
Yeah.
they get to go to the theater, they get to go do this and do that, and it's so fun, and it was integral to getting through things like quarantine last year where I was still holed up in my house, and I was like, I need to write about friends going out and doing fun things or else I'm gonna lose my fucking mind. I
It
haven't been
was
in a movie theater in a
escapism.
year, and yeah, I needed that level of escapism so that they could go and do things. And it's like they all are the same kind of like they're all kind of social outcasts and broadly enjoy the same things, but them all getting together and getting drunk and watching movies, that's what I do with my friends. So
Yeah.
naturally, that's what they're also going to do. So I mean, it's just like, yeah, I'm gonna get blackout drunk on tequila and watch John Carpenter movies. What the fuck do you think I'm gonna do? Um,
It's
but
it's
yeah,
your it's your it's your auteur signature
yeah,
showing.
yep. It'll be there in some form or another, but I enjoyed that very, very much. And that's like Reese and Victoria is like a great cipher for that, like the romantic relationships specifically in that kind of context. And I like how they all kind of tease him about it, but how like it's just very I feel like characters like Reese in other fictional contexts would be treated as like, the comic relief character, and like maybe he'd get like a thing to do later on. Like he'd get treated like how Ron gets treated in the Harry Potter movies, which is
Mhm.
substantially worse than he's treated in the books. But like I want there to be a purpose in that comic relief, but I also want him to get like the treatment of an actual human being and not just like a guy who's there to say a joke once in a while.
That
Uh,
actually brings up a point that I want to make about Reese, and I have a theory,
oh,
and
please.
you're gonna think that this
Theories.
is
Yes. Let's go.
Reese is the Sokka of those who dwell in the dark,
Oh, that's just undeniably true. This is correct.
because because not just of the fact that he is the comic relief character that develops into something more, and that he has a girlfriend who is just fucking complete like warrior, amazing person,
Yeah.
but also the fact that he kind of becomes like a sort of silent MVP for the group within as this keeps going on,
Yep.
because he helps bring them together through like some of the most like awful scenarios, kind of like it's like there's characters that do that to a certain extent, like Chris kind of does it more and just like to keep them stable for the most part, but Reese is like the actual.
Particularly with the Mary Nova situation.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas like later on in the line, it's like Reese actually has like a motivational speech moment, and
Mm-hmm.
like it's like, oh wait, I actually delivered that in a
Yeah.
way where people are kind of like, okay, maybe this isn't completely hopeless.
Yeah. And it's like I really enjoyed getting to do that. And like you're totally right. I once told you that I view Joey and Reese as the Sam and Frodo of those who dwell in the dark, in the
Oh,
sense that
absolutely.
everybody for the longest time is going to think that Joey is the main character in the way that they think that Frodo is the main character. And it's like he's kind of got the most heavy burden placed on him. So that's generally like why they would assume that, but like the actual
Mhm.
core struggle of the narrative is lies with Sam, and that's sort of what Reese is. And I think it's going to become a
Yeah.
lot more apparent in later arcs. But like Reese really is like there's no main character here, just because I feel like the seven of them have pretty evenly distributed weight, and they're all connected in a way that like we still don't know how exactly it is that the seven of them very specifically all happen to have auras, even though that's mathematically impossible. They say that a lot. That's just like they don't know. They're important for some fucking reason,
Yeah.
but they sort of have that like that even level of power. It's like they're important, but it's not like they're like none of them are going to be the chosen one. None of them are going to be the one that saves everything. But
Mhm.
Reese sort of being the one who spearheads all of them, I think is a valuable turn he will take.
Yeah. No, I think I would have to agree with that, and I think it's always just fun for me to see like a character that you would least expect to be like just a major like character within the series be like, oh yeah, they're like it's not even a question at that point. And it's uh it's been honestly probably one of my favorite developments, along with Leo in this arc, because in contrast to Leo just having the worst time in Baron's Hollow, here he kind of does make something of himself that's like genuinely like really cool. And
Yeah,
one of my favorite developments also with him and Ace.
Yeah, and I guess we haven't talked about him just because we haven't had a lot of tertiary characters in Baron's Hollow. It's pretty focused on them. But
Mhm.
Ace, the replacement hunter for Steven, just kind of shows up, who I think also in many ways is like I sort of wanted to have his journey as a character and like the perception of the audience be very similar to that of Thanatos, and that they don't really think much of him at first, and then he just kind of gradually reveals to have more and more layers. And I really liked, I didn't really expect to have such an earnest relationship between Ace and Leo, but like the further it went on, the more it just made sense to me that they would take on more of like a mentor relationship, of like Ace being the only genuine adult amongst like the nine of them, and
Yeah,
how he's got a little bit more life experience, and how he has kind of a checkered past, and how like he just sort of used that to sort of fill into his um very like workman like worldview of just being like, you got to get up every time you get knocked down, even if you don't know why you got to get up. And that sort of mentality just sort of encourages Leo, and getting to write that part where Ace gets to use his abilities to get his older brother Dan into community college. I was just, I don't know why, but like that felt like I was a reader during that part, and I was just like, oh fuck yeah, finally something
yeah,
good happens for poor Dan. It's like Dan's a character who'd like literally the only exposure to him is he gets the shit kicked out of him in the fucking dream sequence in Baron's Hollow. He gets his
yeah,
face turned into pulp. And then in the second arc, it's just like, yeah, we find out he's working like 3 part-time jobs to keep them all afloat. And he abandoned all of his dreams, and he's taking care of Leo. And Leo's like, oh God, I'm going to have to abandon him. Oh shit. Oh God. Oh fuck. And then it's just like, oh, finally we get Dan, who gets to go to college, and then they can just sort of deal with Leo as it goes based on whatever his choice is. And like the
Mhm.
best part about that for me was it's just Ace is like, I would have chosen to become a hunter no matter what, but I didn't choose. I was forced this way. Like I still would have done it,
Mhm.
but I would have liked to have had the choice. So Ace gets to give Leo the thing that Ace never got, is that he gets to give Leo the choice. It's like he might be inclined one way or another, but it's like he sort of like, without the baggage of Dan, Leo gets to sort of make his own decision, sort of unencumbered of that. And that's sort of a conflict that lingers over every decision in all of them, is that it's like they all still get to make the choice of whether or not they want to be a hunter or not, even though pretty much every bit of circumstance is gearing them towards choosing being a hunter. But it's also like, we do have an out if we want one.
Yeah. It's like at least it's there, whereas
Mm-hmm.
the option for Ace was just like, nah, fuck you, you're doing it. It's like okay.
Yeah.
Whereas it feels like it feels like a sincere kind of moment for Ace and Leo when it's not as much just like, oh, you have to do the job. It's like, listen, you're a kid, and I can't force you to do this, but that's just for you to decide. And then when he does decide it, he's like, oh wait, I actually have some semblance of power that I didn't realize that I had.
Yep.
And I think like that moment's much more poignant because of that, especially with the um fight with. I almost did Thanatos, and don't know why I keep doing this. God damn it.
I mean, it does kind of look like that in your defense.
Fair enough. But the fight with them during that whole part,
Oh,
where
basically
they,
all of Volume 5,
yeah,
just the
basically all
fight.
of Volume 5.
Yeah, that was interesting to write. I think I was able to do it is because like I wasn't totally satisfied with how I wrote action in Baron's Hollow. I don't think it was necessarily bad, but it was just kind of like pretty, it was pretty normal, I guess. And when I made the leap of writing the entirety of With Twilight as Our Guide, the fantasy novel last year, is that I went really, really hard on like large scale battles in that, and explaining every single machination of how they worked. And
Mhm.
I think that sort of awakened something in me that was just like, I feel like I can handle this a little bit better. And
Yeah,
when I came around to Volume 5, I was just like, I feel like I can just make this all one big conflict thing, and I can, weave in the emotional beats to sort of like make it feel like, this one instance is a really a progression for all of these characters. And I think I did an all right job at it. And but mainly through the fact that like everyone in that point in the story is at like an inherent disadvantage for like a ton of reasons. Like they don't even have their like normal equipment. They just have a bunch of knives and they instantly get disarmed. But they all have to use their wits and what they've learned up until that point. And it's sort of just like the end fight or just the end game of everything here is going to be the culmination of everything that they've gained and everything that this journey has got them at this point. And I love showing the difference between like volume 5 and volume nine's fight is going to be like pretty substantial. And the difference between volume 9 and Baron's Hollow is like blah. And I really like that sort of disparity of just being able to physically represent the journey in a way. It's like the battle is like a checkpoint or a boss fight of sorts, like on a mechanical sense of just like this is how this growth has been able to affect them.
Yeah, honestly, like I think like the development of these action sequences has been like probably like one of my favorite like things that like oh I can tell like there's been some time of maturing as like a writer for you like
Oh yeah.
while making these because for Baron's Hollow I think for me like it feels a bit fractured in terms of how the fight is set up like
Oh yeah.
it's just like oh they're doing this thing but there's also stuff going on there but we have to wait till the chapter's over to do
It's
that.
basically set up so that it's not a fight. Like it's set
Yeah.
up in a way that it's like it's just what is immediately happening in front of the character, and it's not focused on everything happening all at once. It's very linear.
Yeah, whereas with pretty much like all the action set pieces so far, I think in this arc have been like you get a real sense of like the flow and just like what is actually going on. Like I
Mhm.
especially liked the whole set piece at the mine
Yeah.
later on. That's wonderful. That's like a really wonderful thing because I think it's genuinely like one of my favorite just specific chapters so far in the series because there's so much build up and like atmosphere and then it all culminates into just this big like oh this is a bad
Oh shit.
time
Oh fuck. This is
we
I gotta say, I will ask something
bad
in
time.
terms of like Leo specifically is that did the like I really wanted that battle for in 5 and him regrowing that arm to be like a oh moment
Yeah,
of like
no
because
like
I hinted at like him like feeling like a phantom pain occasionally. Like I try to do like little tiny itty bitty things like you don't know what it's building to quite yet, but it's like throughout the entire arc, it's just like there have always been little tiny instances of whenever Joey gets upset, there's like a little thing that happens with his aura that's like kind of nondescript, but it's like it's always something that's like why does
yeah
that
it's like
happen?
this is building to something
It's just like
that's
I don't
gonna
really
happen
know if this
later.
is cool or not. And Leo's kind of the inverse of that. It's just that he slowly builds up his ability to analog summon more and more and more to the point where it manifests as being able to be like, whoa, holy shit, I can do this cool thing.
Yeah, but like that moment is great. Like it's because like at that point I'm kind of already invested in Leo as a character because he's not just he has his own thing going on and he's like really growing as a character. But then like when that happens, it's like I I feel this sounds like a very vague meme, but it's like the meme of like the four guys that are like sitting on the couch and they're all going like just in excitement
Dude, that's
was that.
perfect because that is exactly what like I was just like I want this to be the moment of like the hype moment of like Goku going Super Saiyan or fucking
Mm,
Tanjiro in Demon Slayer in that one episode taking that thing's head off or like just moments where people just lose their mind out of hype. And like I figured that was a perfect way to do it because I was like, the theme of like that Ace tells Leo is that, everything is a circle, everything is going to repeat. You're going to have to get back up and do all this stuff. And I was like, what if I put Leo in the exact same situation that he was in before when he lost his arm? And now he gets his fucking arm back, kind of,
yeah,
sort of, and he's able to actually show some agency and fight back with that. And it's like a way to show how much he's grown since the end of Baron's Hollow. And I really love doing that whole like reprisal thing of like, it's like what happened before, except
cinematic parallels.
yeah, exactly. It's like it's a bit memey, but it's also just like every time it does get to happen, I get a little gleeful because you get to show how different everyone has become by putting them through largely the same trial and having the outcome just be different. So I
Yeah,
really like getting to do that.
yeah, absolutely. And I think like a great oh shit moment, it can only really happen when you are fully invested in the characters. Like, if it was just like some rando in that situation, it's like,
Mhm.
okay, that's cool or whatever. But when you know it's Leo, what that means for his character, then it's just like, oh, you
Dope.
really feel just like, bro.
And hopefully there will
Fucking
be a couple more moments just like that. Not even in the remaining volume, but just throughout the rest of the series, but in the remaining volume too. But yeah,
yeah.
that's been a very fun thing for me, and especially with Leo, is that like I liked writing like Children of the Grave is definitely like Baron's Hollow is not sunshine and daisies, but I mean, and it definitely gets dark at many points of volumes 3, 4, and 5.
Mhm.
But I'd say I'd wager to say Children of the Grave is pretty consistently more down, at least a little bit darker in tone, especially with like maybe not broadly, but like with specific moments and characters. It goes from like dark to like, oh god. But I like to think that I do a decent job at balancing it out and just having moments where like getting to write Nova coming out to Izzy and Nadia, like that was one of my favorite scenes to write too. And I also just
Mm.
loved the fact that they made a bet and bet actual money on whether or not she was going to be gay or trans. And
Yeah, I freaking
I was like, my friends would do something like that.
I also remember I sent you the memes on that one just because I was very happy about that moment too, and
Yep.
was also in a way its own oh shit moment, but more
Yep.
like I'll 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 pay you $20 to be non-binary. But
Oh, that's
no,
right.
like there's a couple of moments like that in this series that I like, and oh shit moments have the range of great emotional highs of hell yeah, this is great, and then we have the whole thing with Chris and
Yeah,
Nadia.
that was not fun. That one kind of sneaks up on you just because like you know that like the reader knows about that particular character instance a little bit before everyone else knows. So I liked creating that sort of Alfred Hitchcock bomb under the table kind of thing of just like, oh my god, I know that this character is not who they say they are. Holy shit. And then eventually you get to deal with the inevitable fallout of that, and it's really difficult just because Chris suddenly goes from the character who's like dealt with the least amount of shit to the one who debatably has to deal with the most.
Yeah,
And
just like and on a dime completely, like
oh
out of
yeah,
nowhere.
it's completely against his will. And I think I might give away the game a little bit here, but it's like he definitely feels a bit more like he's going to bounce back from it in this particular way, and then once this is all over, um, I have hinted around this at some point. I believe I told you specifically, but I haven't revealed it to like anybody else. But I'll use this just because it's buried deep enough within the video, and it won't happen for a while. But the end of Children of the Grave is not the end of content for those who dwell in the dark this year. There's a bonus volume I'm going to be writing that takes place like a month after the end of Children of the Grave between certain, and it's just going to be like it's. I won't say it's filler just because it actually is kind of important, but it's also just sort of like a reprieve. It's sort of just getting to see their characters a bit more in the, like there's not going to be any like conflict. It's just sort
Yeah,
of like seeing like a catching up to see where everyone is right before the beginning of the next thing.
yeah,
And
it's a breath of fresh air before going back down into the pit,
death. And one of the
pretty
things that
much.
I'm looking forward to doing is that once sort of Chris gets past the initial fallout of that, is that sort of binds him to Joey in a way because they've had that same experience of losing someone in the exact same way. And that sort of creates an avenue for them to have a dynamic that they didn't have before. So I'm
Oh,
happy to explore
yeah.
something like that. Is that both of them they haven't really gotten like together in like an intimate sense or anything, but it's like they've both lost the girl that they loved.
Yeah.
So
I'm
yeah,
very excited to see how how that goes honestly later on. And I also just enjoy kind of like how that develops for Chris and sort of how it's like you get the sense of like the his and was it
Layla.
Ladia? Lila. Okay, I don't know why I thought Ladia for some reason. Lila, it was L's.
Yeah, there's many of those.
But I like that there's also just the build up before the whole big reveal. And also, I like the way that you did reveal, the whole twist of, oh, Thanatos killed her and
Yeah.
is now disguising as her, because I was reading the chapters like, oh, it's a Thanatos chapter, we're gonna
Yeah.
do another killing of someone sort of
Yeah, because
unrelated.
they kill two people who are like, you get the sense that they're definitely killing in like a methodology, like that they're trying to do something specific that you don't
Yeah,
really know until much 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 later. But you're just like,
yeah.
they're definitely trying to find specific people. And so that when that chapter opens up, it's just like, oh, they killed somebody else this time. And then it's like, oh,
Oh, yeah.
oh no.
You remember very vividly the fucking messages I sent you on Twitter, because like it took me a moment. It took me a moment to be like, that was a very bad time. I
Getting to
did
see
not like
Luke
that.
react to the twists and turns of this narrative has been like, I could never sell another book in my life, and I would have I would have got my money's worth just out of
It's
being doing that.
do you like to be an emotional prankster?
A
Fucking
little
asshole.
a little bit. I mean, like partially it's gratification that what I do is successful in somewhat, and then there is the undeniable. It's just like I'm a little bit of a sadist on some level, I think. It's just like I have to be to write shit like this. So I mean,
You
yeah,
enjoy to watch me suffer
a little
for
bit,
your art?
little tiny bit, little baby bit.
I
Not gonna
thought you
lie.
were the one that's supposed to suffer for your art.
Not anymore. Now I am the art. But yeah, that was cool. That was fun. I definitely um it's actually interesting. I didn't think to do the Layla as like a midpoint um climax for like the narrative until pretty late in the game. That was actually something that like the the other big important thing that happens in this has always been in my head, but the that one was a little bit later. I think that one was like, I think I came up with that like a few months before I wrote it. I was just like, I really need something that's more in like the center of all of this to like branch out from, because like if it's just building to that one conflict, that's a lot of space in between the beginning and the end. So I need like something that happens a little bit earlier on, something that's a bit more grabbing. And I was like, what can I do to like weave this in there and to like, oh wait, this all actually works really super well. And so I ended up doing that. And I was really happy with that, how that turned out.
Yeah, I think that it is a very good like middle point, because that's not just because it's like a massive, incredibly destroying um, twist that happens for the story, but also because like it's uh, kind of just like, well, everything after here is going to be just the worst time. And I think having that be the cusp of where that change happens is
Mm-hmm.
like a good place.
And that gets to like, you know, it's not just, you know, Chris is on like a one track like path after that. Is that I liked how sort of like another relationship I really liked writing was between Chris and Nova. Is that like they develop a very unlikely friendship. Is that like, you know, Chris is just this very, like, at least when it comes to other people, he's a very easygoing and very understanding guy, and he's just kind of there for you. And Nova's like just doubting themselves all the time, and it's just like, who is the person I can trust the most in this situation of just being like bedrock. And then Chris comes to mind, and they sort of have that thing where they watch out for each other and they do their best. And I love that they're such good friends. That part really,
I do too.
I like that too. They're very wholesome
That's
relationship they've got.
honestly, it's great. It reminds me of um well, I mean, you kind of referenced it when I was when we were joking about like Infinity Train, like that one time that
Oh
like there's a
yeah.
relationship and that's kind of similar,
Mhm.
like, except a different dynamic. Like imagine Chris was more of a himbo, basically.
And you know, Chris does have his himbo tendencies. He's a
Yeah,
little bit of a dummy sometimes, and that's why I love him though.
he's great. We don't hate him for it. We love him for it.
No, it's like we are firmly pro himbo here in the Those Who Dwell in the Dark verse, and because himbos are lovely people. And
Like put
and
that in
lots of himbos are
quotations.
that's the quote on the beginning of, or the fucking, I'll put that on the center of the next omnibus. um Himbos are great people.
uh,
But yeah, I loved sort of writing that, and I like sort of dealing with, because they have a cool dynamic where they're sort of on equal ground in the sense that Nova goes to them at first, and Chris is just kind of like, look, I'm a little out of my depth here, but I will do whatever I can here. But like, I have no experience with this. I'm just a himbo. I don't
yeah,
know. I don't know
I don't.
how. Fucking Nova got to be one of my favorite genders. Fucking, so he doesn't really know, but he's like able to reassure them in a very like base, very human way, just because he doesn't have to like dance around anything. He's just going to be himself and be honest, and that is what ends up reassuring them. And then in sort of a juxtaposition, once Layla is dead, then they sort of, their dynamic kind of reverses, and then Nova's just like, they're a little bit more together, and they're like, I really don't real like, I am not somebody like Joey, or not like, feasibly Nova is the only person who has not had someone in their immediate sphere die. And so
Mhm.
they are the only person who is just like, I don't really know what it's like to lose anybody like this. So I want to help you, and I love you, and I want to see you flourish, and I want to give you good advice, but I don't necessarily know if that's the most helpful thing. And it is helpful to a point, but that's sort of the limitation with Chris, is that it's just like, part of the message of this stuff is that, sometimes the bad things that happen to you in life can send you beyond the tipping point, and sometimes the characters go beyond that point, and maybe some of them haven't gotten there yet, but you know shit do be
Yet
difficult. Yet fucking gonna hide in my bunker here.
you're testing my love
It's,
sometimes.
look, I hope that maybe no matter what its contents, volume 9 will be good enough so that that love may stay exactly the same. um
I'm pretty certain on that, but it will still be a test regardless.
I hope that I'm able to clear that bar, but I think that's just sort of a testament to sort of the new dynamics of all of the characters, that now they get a little bit more breathing room, and I just sort of like how they're able to interact, and I like how fucking Izzy becomes the lead singer of the band that they're in, that they don't
Ah,
have a lead singer for, because I think that's badass.
yeah,
um and I like just sort of like the smaller details like that of their friendship, like sort of the most like the normal stuff of um trying to think of like specific examples, but just like everybody going to band practice, like that's something that I throw back in, because that's something I remember doing. Like, I wasn't in the band, but I still went to go see Morgan's band practice a bunch of times and play at different
yeah,
venues, and that's like a really fond memory I have of just being around people, and them playing music. And that's sort of like a foundational thing. They all just sort of hang out and go out and do stuff, and I loved getting to do that. That was super fun for me.
yeah. I think like stuff like that, someone might look into it and be like, this is just a bunch of nothing, but like I see it as just like, oh, these characters are really bonding and having their slice of life moments. So when the pain does come, it actually has
Hurts
impact, and
more.
yeah, it hurts more, which love it, love it, love it, love it.
Love it for me.
But in sincerity, though, like those moments are really, really great because it's kind of just not something super consequential, but like there's still stuff in the plot kind of going on, and the characters are still kind of learning more about themselves as it happens. I
Yeah.
mean, like it's, I think it's because it's maybe easier to see it like when you're watching like a TV show, like, oh, this is just a scene where, the
Yeah.
characters have like a bonding moment. Whereas like with a book, it's kind of more like, oh, it is a very dedicated scene to that.
Yeah.
Uh,
You sort of get the tenor of it a little bit more easily, maybe just because you have the character there to like explicitly explain to you. It's just like, this is, the function this particular thing serves. Like, maybe not that didactically, but still sort of
yeah,
in a way of just like, hey, this is the thing that made us bond a little closer together.
yeah,
And that was nice to have, just because, Baron's Hollow is like, a lot of them do know each other, but they're still mostly strangers to one another. So I wanted to be able to really build up the group sort of dynamic that they all have with one another, and sort of and kind of invert it in ways too, because I think one of the dynamics that's explored is sort of the reverse of the ones we talked about thus far, and that's Reese and Joey, who drift further and further apart throughout the volume, which is a very difficult thing to write just from an emotional standpoint. But it's like they're
Mhm.
trying, and it's just they're so obviously on different like polar opposites of where they need to be, and they're both dealing with their own shit that's completely irrespective of both of them, and they're both fucking histrionic morons who blame themselves far too much for their all of their problems and assume way too much responsibility, and that sends them off in different directions. But I did like kind of getting to invert that particular thing, because I think that made sort of like their friendship is a really foundational part of the story, and sort of seeing how that friendship is tested is a really like, you know, can be genuinely kind of upsetting, because the thing that really tested my abilities was writing argument scenes, which I hate
Mhm.
doing because
Yeah,
lots
I
of
could understand.
argument scenes in fiction that I see, regardless of medium, usually rely on misunderstandings between people. And broadly speaking, that's not a bad thing, but the misunderstandings are usually like result in them acting out of character. And then it always just goes right over my head. And I'm just like, oh, why are you all fighting when you could actually be like, your characters could be clashing? And whenever people come at odds with each other in the story, I try to have it be like they're both coming from a place of really thinking that they're right, and not
Mhm.
sort of having like something like, oh, you thought that this was one thing, but actually it was another thing. Like writing
Mhm.
sort of like they don't even really have a fight, but Joey and Reese's sort of last few interactions in the story are just clearly very like there's something fractured there, something missing that wasn't missing there before. Or the big one, which is Nadia and Izzy fighting, and I think volume 4,
Mhm.
something like that.
That sounds about right.
Yeah,
Maybe
they sort of have this big
6.
fight
I don't know.
after this reveal that Izzy's been hiding the fact that the true nature of her vision, and that it could end up being like killing her, and whether or not that's sort of like super relevant or not, or whether or not it's like even going to come into play, like the vision might not even happen, but like
Mhm.
it's sort of affecting their ability to communicate. Like that's sort of the thing that like is that her lying doesn't matter. It's the fact that she couldn't communicate with her partner, that was the real source of like the fracturing there. And having to write about that was just sort of difficult, because it's like, I love you two and I want the
Yeah.
best for you two, please
It's it's
stop
it's
fighting.
it's the situation like for me when I read it, I'd just be like, I just want them to be fucking happy. God.
I want my disaster lesbians to be happy. And no, hey, nothing
No.
says that better than having Joey, slayer of homophobia, um, get
Deck.
up and absolutely fucking demolish someone who
Oh
tosses a
god.
slur at them, which
There
that
was
was fun.
so many meme ideas that I had for that one when you told me about it beforehand, and when I finally got to it, I just kind of ended up on the fucking death you wanted, it's yours, my friend.
Just fucking like, oh, I was just like when I was a kid and people tossed around slurs like that at my friends, what was the thing that I fantasized about doing to them? And it's like grabbing their hair and literally smashing their fucking face in. And I was like, all right, Joey, let's have this be the kickstart to your spiral, let's do this, bitch. And
This is
then
where
it
it all
was,
began.
this is where it all begins. And like the meme that I would think of is that Joey O'Boyle being like, get behind me, lesbians.
I was thinking two things that I thought of actually from that was the fucking Arthur meme with the fist.
Yeah, it's
And
definitely him.
when you said "get behind me, lesbians," it made me think of fucking, not to bring up Kingdom Hearts again, but the screenshot of fucking Woody like pulling back Sora.
I don't think anyone's ever loved you. It's just like, Jesus fucking Christ, Woody. Oh my
Dude.
God.
Uh,
You're being so mean to Vanitas.
God, I just there are a lot of moments where it's like part of me is like, oh, I just love this moment, it's very sincere, and then also another part of me is like, how can I make this a meme, because this is the only
Yeah.
way I show appreciation apparently.
You know what? I still respect it because it means that like the feeling was so definitive that it conjured up a very specific image, and you're so good at conjuring those specific images that it's like I might be decent at relaying these ideas and communicating and what have you.
Yeah, and also from the way I see it, some of the best franchise and storytelling or pieces of storytelling have been the source of millions of memes. Like, just look at Lord of the Rings, basically.
Oh my God. I mean, I follow a meme account for Lord of the Rings on Twitter, and they post things like every hour. And it's like, that's how
Because
you know.
because there's so much stuff that you could do because some moments are just great, some moments are kind of silly, and some are just genuinely emotionally impactful. But like when you have that range of feeling, you can create something out of it, which is sometimes just stupid shit posts. But hey,
Yeah.
that's influence of your work going
That,
into another work.
I'll fucking take it's like it's again, it's my principle with fan fiction. It's just like if it's being made about my thing, if I get memes made from those in the world in the dark, then it's like, okay, I did it. This is success for me. It works.
Your
Uh
influence is spread.
yes, eventually when we have those who dwell memes, that's when I will be like the overlord of the universe.
Well, your
I will
terrain.
yeah, I'll be my own form of emperor demon. It'll be great. Um witness my fall from grace, Scorsese style. Um
Maybe, or you can do the best alternative route and surpass and decide to defeat J.K. Rowling in like a fucking
that
four-dimensional chess or something.
that's also my goal. Like I won't lie, when I wrote my fantasy novel last year and I made it 10,000 words longer than Order of the Phoenix, I was just like, you're nothing. Get on my fucking level. Um
You are but a child.
you are yeah, you have nothing on me.
If I could angle my face in a way enough, I'd be like pathetic.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like like I now have a trans character in my story, and I want a fan fiction where it's like post canon Harry Potter, and everybody grows up to be a cop, and then they fucking like Nova just shows up and just fucking murders all of them, just rips their fucking heads off. A cab, just yes,
Wizard cops ain't got shit on me.
yeah, fucking R's get out of my home. Fucking just have everybody show up and just demolish them. Just be like, well, you know what? At least hunters aren't transphobic. Fuck off.
Yeah, pretty much.
And hey, even
What a
demons aren't. They're they're
yeah,
they're
pretty
all accepting
much.
too. It's fine.
Even demons know it.
Demons, no.
God, that's fucking. I can't believe my mind literally just like went that far deep into my
I was gonna
psyche for
say
that
that's
stupid
some
joke.
deep lore. That's some like deep reality lore.
Fuck. Uh, man, time sure does suck.
One of the many themes of my story. Time sure do fucking. I'm pretty sure Victoria has some variant of that when talking to Stephen's grave. She's just like, time,
Yeah,
fuck off.
man, just pretty much. Uh,
And I identify with that so strongly
big, pretty much.
in an
I'm trying to
immense
think.
mood.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else I'm like missing to talk
There
about.
are a few things, but they're like pretty much everything to do with Joey leads to like
Hmm.
the biggest spoiler imaginable.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
apples and oranges. I guess the only thing we haven't covered would be, I guess, technically, I mean, we did mention Ace, but Ace and Jesse has a more prominent role
Yes.
later. Um,
Yeah.
and Jesse is important because technically Jesse has existed longer than some of those characters because one of the things I started writing in between that fantasy novel and Children of the Grave is the first spinoff that I actually wanted to write, which is called Bloodletting. And
Mhm.
Bloodletting it takes place in the same universe and shares a couple of characters. It takes place in like Reagan administration era.
Mm.
It's like orbits Barron's Hollow in terms of location, but it is basically a like horror noir
Mm.
about it
Interesting.
centers around the main character named Alejandro, who you probably are
Mm.
familiar with because
Yes.
Alejandro is married to Jesse in Those Who Dwell in the Dark. And basically, Alejandro works for a crime syndicate. The syndicate in question being the O'Boyle clan. He is best friends with Connor O'Boyle, Joey's father. And so it's them being like just sort of doing shit, and they get involved in a territorial gang war with a completely different drug cartel that is also led by half breeds, aka vampires, who they don't really know that they're demons. It's just they're in the universe. If you are bitten by a demon who can spread it, or if a demon mates with a human, you are a half breed, which basically makes you a vampire. And
Gotcha.
essentially, what happens is it's kind of sort of a Romeo and Juliet love story, because Jesse works for the Kansas City mob that's the opposing side, and Alejandro works for the O'Boyles. And then they get in sort of a territorial dispute, and there's kind of a gang war that happens. And Connor O'Boyle and Jesse and Alejandro and Vaughn, the hunter who dies at the very beginning of Baron's Hollow, is also involved in the main conflict because he is in Baron's Hollow and he knows Alejandro. So it's a bunch of characters who are kind of involved in the story, and some who are alluded to. It's a lot of like their backstory. So, and I have like 33,000 words of that done. So I'm definitely finishing that. So like you sort of get this like Ace has lots of different friends who are sort of in this sort of network of people who are work with the hunters, and that's sort of you get like a little bit of information as to how they came to be in bloodletting. So Jesse's this person who has been alive for like 50 years or so, and she has sort of her and her husband are just sort of like kind of like supernatural. They're like wandering demon hunters, and they're not technically hunters. They're just sort of like they just sort of in their employ because they don't really trust them, but they also agree with them. So you have Jesse, who's just this kind of fun Spitfire character who I just like writing just because she's rowdy and she really just wants to fuck people shit up. And she's cool. But Alejandro isn't actually in the story yet properly because he's like overseas in terms of Those Who Dwell in the Dark. But he's one of my favorite characters I've ever written. I love him. He's the cool thing with him in Bloodletting is that he is like he was born in like the late 1890s, and he goes to World War One with his best friend, who with his best friend Joseph, Joey's grandfather, and they go to the first war, World War, and they both get injured, and they both come back. And one of the biggest things from World War One that soldiers had to deal with was they were addicted to morphine because they didn't know how to like properly administer morphine at the time for people who had serious injuries, so that they would walk away with addictions. So Alejandro walked away with an addiction to morphine, and he accrues this debt. So Joseph is like, hey, my family is like a crime syndicate family, and if we work for them, we can get money. And so they do, and they become really, really good friends. And eventually, since Joseph is Alejandro gets bit by this mysterious person and becomes a half-breed. And so because Joseph is a normal human, Joseph eventually dies, but Joseph has a child. And Alejandro sort of acts as both a guardian and best friend to Connor. So they have a very strange relationship where he feels very protective of him, but also they're just guys hanging out, just dudes.
Yeah, they're just being dudes. Yeah, but there's also that going on.
And this is a okay. The particular character from Bloodletting that does show up in Volume 8 is watching Superman 2 on television, and that is the first movie that they are shown to that Connor and Alejandro watch together at the very beginning of Bloodletting. So that's a little bit of piece of connective tissue. And also, when you really think about it, you're like, oh.
Yeah, I'm not gonna say anything.
Yeah.
But like knowing what you just said, that makes me very sad.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a particularly tragic character in the series who oof. He'll get his moment to shine in Bloodletting, though. He's also very good. Like him, a fair deal. But yeah, there's spin-offs and things to look forward to.
Hmm.
There's the one that explains sort of Anna's backstory, first generation of hunters. There's Bloodletting, and there's also one I wanted to talk about that is some stuff with like the sort of generation of Stephen and Victoria and some of their friends back when they were alive and they like first became hunters, like some stuff that
Mhm.
happened with them. So like there's a story with them too that I kind of want to write. That's also I think would make for good stuff that would just give you a little bit more stuff between the two of them, just because they don't have like a super large amount of screen time together or
Yeah, this is pretty
time.
minuscule because in the grand scheme of just how much the series has gone on by this point,
Yeah.
and it's like it'd be interesting to see where that goes. And it's also like the series just has a lot of good possibilities for spin-off stuff, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different components, and hell, there's one element I haven't mentioned just because it appears so late in the game and is so indicative of where the series ends up later. In terms
Hmm.
of a mystery character who basically shows
Oh.
up in the middle of the story, and literally his whole deal is that nobody knows who the fuck he is, and
Oh.
or how
It,
he got there, or and presently we don't even know if he's still alive. But whether or not he is
yeah.
alive and what his particular purpose is also something that opens up a very, very broad, wide thing in terms of the greater scope of the conflict at play. So there's him as well. I can go ahead and say that his name is Lewis, just
Hmm.
because he does get a name. But
Yeah.
yeah, there's him too. He do be showing up.
I do have one character that I have a bit of a big question about.
Ooh, go ahead.
Actually, though, before I do that, though, I need to put my charger on because this thing
Mm.
has like 6%
Oh
battery
boy,
left.
go.
Oh,
There we go.
great.
Okay, you remembered what you were going to ask me about.
Yes. So you mentioned kind of a character that's sort of, like we don't know much about, and that reminded me of one pretty big thing. Who was the fucking kid in the mine?
That's Lewis.
Oh, okay, that is Lewis. All right. I was
Uh-huh.
like, I'm not sure if that was who you were referring to or not.
Yeah, he is the mystery character who just kind of shows up, and even the demon doesn't know what the fuck his deal is. And if I'm remembering correctly, when Meliora has which by the way, as a musical reference, when Meliora
Oh,
has that conversation with Thanatos, they specifically refer to the fact that they can't see him,
hmm.
which Meliora is omnipotent. So like,
That's a
that's
bit odd.
weird. That
Yeah.
means something. Hmm.
Something important, most likely.
Yes. Yeah, definitely something for later on. But yeah, Lewis will be an interesting thing to go into.
Yeah.
Be he alive or dead?
Yeah, like that whole deal I'm curious about because I no spoilers, but Volume 8 doesn't necessarily have a whole lot to do with a lot of the characters except for one.
Yeah.
And because of that, that whole thing just kind of is left to the side for a little bit,
Yep.
which I mean, I'm assuming because it'll be significant later, but I'm just
Yeah.
kind of like every time for six at certain moments during Volume 8, I was like, wait, wasn't there like a kid that was just like in the mine? What
Mm-hmm.
was that deal?
Yep, it was a little statue, and Thanatos found it and was just like, "What the fuck is this thing? And why is it emitting dark energy?" Okay, never mind. Don't ask questions.
It's like
But
when you
yeah, that
find fucking just like a massive cockroach in like the cupboard, and you're like, I don't know what that is. I'm not going to deal with that now.
I'm just gonna wait until I'm equipped to do so. But yeah, that is Lewis, and he's quite important. Um, but we won't know exactly how. But I'm trying to think of like what the fucking quote is. Just like he's the key to all this.
Hmm.
What the fuck is that even from? It's from some
George
fucking movie.
Lucas.
Mighty, yeah. It's like it's the key to all this. He's a funnier character than we've ever had before. Lewis
Lewis
is
is the
not the
key to
Jar
all
Jar.
this.
Yeah, Lewis is not the Jar Jar Binks. Hopefully not. Uh,
Hopefully.
hopefully not. Um, or maybe he is. Maybe he's the secret Sith Lord. Who knows?
Oh
You
yeah,
don't know.
fucking the theory is that uh, Lewis is actually a demon like prince somehow.
I mean that there is a character who will show up who does have demonic royalty, who we have not seen. Well, we has been alluded to. We haven't really, and maybe it's Lewis. I don't know, but like,
It
I
could
think
be anybody.
I think the most interesting thing I can say is that in the grand scheme of things, even though it's like we obviously there's like the seven archdemons and Thanatos is one of them. So you have like six other ones there. You have Erebus and Meliora might be a villain question mark if an extra dimensional being can even be a villain at this point.
Yeah.
But also, the biggest and most revealing thing about the future of this series that I will reveal is that Erebus is not the final villain of the story. So there's that. So try to
big
build
fear.
that. Yeah, one fear.
One fear.
But yeah, technically not. That doesn't mean that he's not like the final boss, but there's definitely there's more there that maybe we have not seen yet.
More on the horizon.
So yes, a horizon of darkness.
Oh no, I don't like that.
Yeah,
that sounds bad and not fun. That's basically just been me with like every progression in the story so far has been like, oh, that sounds bad and not fun. Can't wait to read it.
Yeah. Well, I will say if you want something to look forward to is that the cool thing about the next arc, which I can reveal the names here just to set up hype. There's Baron's Hollow, Children of the Grave, which by the way, Black Sabbath song, if you didn't know that, it's a reference. Third arc is just going to be called Twilight City. Fourth arc is The Void War. Fifth arc is Collapse the Light. So there you go. That's what that's all called.
I like that last one a lot, even though it scares me.
It's also a song by my favorite band, which is probably why I used it for the last one. But it's also very thematically appropriate.
Limp Bizkit.
Yeah, that's the one. I was so tempted to call the final arc Roland, and I didn't end up doing, or did it for the Nookie, obviously. But what the cool thing about Twilight City when we get there is that obviously we're going to see like the internal politics and the hunters and stuff, is that there's a lot more characters. There's like a huge amount of characters. There's like 7 different battalions of hunters who all do different things, and they all have captains. And then there's obviously like all of the characters there. There's the civilians. And so there's going to be lots of different possibilities for who interacts with our main cast and what they end up doing and where they end up going. And it will be dope. It'll be super cool.
And it'll be a fun time.
Yeah. Especially for Joey. Especially for Joey.
God damn it. Let him be. Holy shit, man.
We got one more volume. And we'll
one more.
Maybe everybody will get an upswing eventually. Maybe. Or
maybe I could also grow a 3rd foot. So done. But not really though.
Oh my god.
Simultaneously in the middle ground now.
It'll be great to see how I can test the boundaries of our friendship with the progression of this series. Just eventually, I just like after Twilight City, you just flip an entire table and just be like, I'm done with it. I can't do it anymore.
If I ever do get to the point where I am just like, you have crossed the line, sir, I will send you a picture of sad Mario at a bus stop.
Oh no.
That'll be the sign.
Is that volume 8?
No, but I get a feeling something will happen. No, that was more like volume 4, ending of volume 4.
Oh yeah. Well, I was gonna say because there is a bus at one point. And hey, it was not a coincidence. Well, I mean, I guess it was kind of a coincidence, but it was just like, hey, there's a Kate Bush reference in there, and I was like, I'll
Yeah,
appreciate that.
I was I was I was reading that. I was just like, oh, I feel represented now.
Yep, absolutely. Just
Even though
fucking
the moment in which it happens is just like so fucking sad.
yeah, a little bit. I was listening to that album earlier that day, and I was just like, oh, that would be perfect for this. And I was like, well,
Is
time to do it.
not to use fucking office memes or whatever, but there's an edit of, I don't even remember what the original line was, but someone edited to say, "Do you think that making me cry is cool?"
And my response is, maybe I got a little bit more Thanatos in me than I let on. Who knows? I mean, I too wish I was a hot genderless redhead who could like fucking absolutely throw down. I mean, don't we all?
Don't we all? Isn't that the struggle of life
Yeah.
when you get down to it?
Thanatos' base form needs to be played by Ruby Rose. That's just throwing that out there, Hollywood. I'm giving you gold.
Get uh who would you get to like direct this as a series?
Oh man, I've had this thought like so often, and there's lots of right answers too. Like I think the go-to for any kind of horror adaptation of any kind, like not even just me, is Guillermo del Toro, because I feel like
Hmm.
he literally can do no wrong in my opinion. And I feel like he's so good at balancing both the like fantastical, really intricate horror with like coming of age stuff, and also
Hmm.
like higher fantasy stuff with stuff like Hellboy. So like
Hmm.
I would and like more heartfelt romance stuff with Shape of Water. So like I would 100% love him to see him do it. Somebody who I think shares a very similar court ethos to me when it comes to storytelling and characters, and even his occasional penchant for both cruelty and like sappy emotional shit is Mike Flanagan.
Yeah,
Specifically
that's
with
was one person I thought of, honestly. It was like,
Doctor Sleep is very much something that I was just like, I would like this to be made a whole lot like that. That just seems right. I also want the girl who plays Abra to play Nadia, because I think that would be
mm,
A+ casting.
I would
Uh,
agree.
and there's so many like fucking people who are like so talented right now working in Hollywood, and I'm trying to think of like there's certainly ones who I've thought of like particularly speaking, uh, and maybe even specifically in TV, there might be a couple people who don't immediately come to mind.
Mm.
I have expressed the idea that like if I perfect world and I got to do whatever I wanted, I would kind of want it to be animated because I just think
Hmm.
that would be dope.
Who would you get? Do you know any people that come to mind to do like animation direction?
Again, if perfect world, I would get uh it's a toss up because there's a lot of really good anime studios that I really like Studio Bones does, like they
Hmm.
did Full Metal Alchemist, they did Eureka 7, they do tons of great shit, but like in terms of the thing that would just make the best looking thing, Studio Ufotable, who did Demon Slayer, who did Fate
Hmm.
Zero, and who did Garden of Sinners, and Garden of Sinners is maybe like the most aesthetically me thing ever made. So like that, I would certainly not be uh, reluctant to approach at all. But I also like, even if like an American studio who did stuff like like Starburns or something like that, like I could see
Hmm.
them like
Yeah.
making. I could see them being able to pull something out of that. Uh,
Yeah.
it's
I can see that.
I hmm, God, if I could pick people to write it other than me, Ryan Johnson. I
Hmm.
trust that man with my entire being, so I simply think that he would do the best job. Um,
Also, seeing him do horror would be really interesting, honestly.
oh, absolutely. And if I could pick who could shoot it, I would want Mr. Chung Hoon Chun, who did
Hell
shoot the It
yeah!
remake, but he primarily shoots for Park Chan Wook, who is my
Mhm.
favorite director, who I think would just really own that, like that particular look is just it's so it's fucking it's palpable. I
It's
want it.
pristine.
It's pristine. It's beautiful. I love it. Um, Or also Sony Pictures Studio, fucking the Spider-Verse studio. Please,
Yeah.
please do it. Please do it.
So like here's the thing about Sony Pictures animation at least is like I
Mhm.
think they're kind of branching out more into even more stranger kind of like animation stuff cuz like they got a project from Gendy Tartakovsky that's basically just like a freaking medieval knight animated film basically, which might be just
Okay,
action.
first of all, sign me the fuck up for that. Um, Secondly, also another person I would want who would attach to it, who would really, I think, nail the tone of like seriousness, but also there's like the lighthearted humor and there's like the younger kid stuff. It's Alex Hirsch,
Oh
Gravity
yeah.
Falls, and also a co-writer on Spider Verse.
Yeah.
Dude is just like I channel him. He gets
Okay,
me.
so you saying that right now is just like I completely 100% like unapologetically be like, "Oh shit, no, you're right. Fuck." I can see that now.
Yeah, and I mean, and I'm also just an enormous fan of Gravity Falls, which uh, definitely shows in Barron's Hollow in those earlier parts. I think because it's just kind of like, huh, this is some like, is are Dipper and Mabel going to show up at some point or
Yeah.
something? Because
I
like this.
actually it's funny you mentioned that. I actually just finished a show like last month.
Oh, really? I
Yeah,
fucking love that show. I
I
remember first watching that, and I was
yeah.
just like, this is the most. It's like the X Files, but if it stayed as good as like season three the whole time. The only thing I will add to anything other than like go read the story for free, go buy it, go do whatever you want, just consume that bitch. Um, uh, I have lots of projects that are in the working, but I think I haven't announced it on anything yet, so I guess I can do it here. My next project that I have fully outlined that is a departure from anything Those Who Dwell related is I wanted to do something that was a bit different for me, but also very in keeping with my genre leanings. And that is, I decided to do a public domain story, and
Hmm.
the character slash story that I'm going to be taking on and reinterpreting and making my own version of is H.P. Lovecraft's Reanimator. I have
Yo.
outlined an entire version of what my version of that story would be. It's quite different than any other version of it that exists currently. I'm almost dead set on the title Among the Living because that's a reference to a thrash metal album that I A like, and B, that particular thrash metal album is famous because it features the villain of Stephen King's The Stand on it. So it all loops back around,
It
bitch.
all comes back at some point.
It
Holy shit,
all
wow.
I can do it all day. I've got that in the works. I have Those Who Dwell spinoffs that I'm going to get to eventually. I have a an actual young adult fantasy novel that I have been wanting to write for some time that I'm going to tackle eventually. I don't really know the title of that one, but that one's going to be interesting. It'll like actually be for like fucking middle school, high school age ish. Um, can't say the fuck word. Oh no. Um,
Oh no.
oh
You
no.
can't say that word. It's because that
It's
word doesn't
for
exist
it's
unless if you're 18.
forbidden. It's forbidden. And I also have a story that I do have the completed with Twilight as our guide, and that's sort of a part one of two kind of thing. And I'm gonna write the part two to that eventually. I don't know when that first one will be out. I don't know if I'm going to publish it or if I can shop it around a little bit more to a literary agent, but we'll see. But I've got that, so I've got half of an entire saga fucking written. And the last thing is actually something you've read, which is called Avalon Reprise, which is like a really high concept sci-fi thing that's also pretty high concept in structure. And I am like totally in love with that story, and I'm totally going to do it. And I've already written like the first couple of chapters, but like I still feel like I need to grow a bit more as a writer to fully tackle that because that's a big fucking thing.
That's fair.
But yeah,
But also
I love
that
that story. So
that whole preview that you showed me was kind of enough to sell me on it, and it kind of feels like you're being a bit of a fucking tease because you're just like, here's like 3 chapters of an uncompleted thing and be like, all right, I'll check it out. And I got like really invested. And it's like, God damn it.
My stories be immediately emotional, so unfortunately that is the drawback of not having them finished completely. But hey, if you're once that's done, if you're hankered for material with Twilight as our guide, it'll probably have you busy for a good long while.
Yeah,
Oh
and
boy.
I am excited for that too, honestly.
That's a completely new thing, new characters, big thing, big Berserk vibes, big Full Metal Alchemist
Ooh,
vibes. Um,
ooh,
oh yeah, it was basically
hmm.
that was born of the fact that like I like wanted to write a big project because I had all that time on my hands and I knew I wouldn't get the chance to do it again, but also that entire impetus for that whole story came out of the fact that I was so disappointed with the rise of Skywalker and particularly what happened with the character of Kylo Ren that I was just so
Ooh,
infuriated that I was
ooh.
like, fuck
Yeah.
it, I'm gonna do it and I'm gonna do it better because fuck Disney. And then I wrote one particular character and who's basically Kylo Ren, but his character arc isn't dog shit. So
You know, sometimes spite can be a good bit of motivation.
it it got me this far. 280,000 words later. Woo.
Well, if it's gotten you this far, you gotta keep going.
Oh yeah, and I keep fucking. There's so many fictional equivalents. I have another character in that story who's like literally just fucking Azula from Avatar: The Last Airbender, who is my favorite genre of villain, which is just fucking crazy.
Just
And
a bit nuts, not
like
gonna lie.
like I tried to like separate her slightly from Azula because the fact that like she is just like like the spiteful older sibling who's like she's the same character. Like I didn't even intend it to happen, and then I looked back on it in retrospect and was like, oh fuck, she's the same. Oh no, like she's not particularly important, but she's definitely there, and it's like, welp.
Yeah. Well, now that if whenever that comes out and I read it, then I'll be like, oh, I can make these comparisons. I'll make memes about it for you.
Yeah, there's a cool fight scene with that character that you'll get to read, and then I'm sure that will yield some kind of cool thing. There's lots of action, lots of cool shit. It's dope.
I very big hype. I the hype cannot contain this
Large hype.
frame.
Is there anything that you need to plug?
Um, besides being a big fucking idiot,
Go
not
follow
that I
Luke
can.
on twitter.com and letterboxd.com.
I write movie reviews. My most recent review was of In the Heights, where I said that I don't like Broadway. So,
And but you said you liked
if
Sondheim, so people shouldn't massacre you too hard for that.
fair enough, I
But
guess.
Luke is one of wow, your watch history has not been great. Ghost Dad.
Ghost Dead,
Oh no.
the Sword and the Stone, and In the Heights. But at least the Fox and the Hound was good.
Yeah,
I need to
Fox and the Hound makes me cry because I hear Kurt Russell be like, "Those days are over, Todd," and I'm like, "I want to fucking
basically,
die. I want to die
yeah.
right now."
Yeah. See, so this is what I mean about having good variety because I fucking watched Orlando and I'm about to watch The Turin Horse tonight,
Oh
and
damn.
my watch history has been fucking goofy animated
Going
movies.
from Berserk to the Fox and the Hound and Ghost Dad is like just enormously powerful energy.
This is who I am. You don't know. You don't know the extent of the things I've seen.
Just imagining you staring out the window with the Guts theme playing.
Oh, I can't even replicate it.
Fucking Susumu Hirasawa soundtracks are just like you hear them out of context and you're just like, this is goofy as hell. And then you see the thing that they're in and you're just like,
Yeah, yeah, like actually crying.
yeah, like I mean, like I'll just literally imagine like Guts staring into the distance and I'll just be like,
Do you want to? Do you want to know where I first heard the Guts theme? It was a video.
is it a meme?
It is a meme. It was a video of like basically like a big open field with like a sunset,
Oh
and
no.
the camera pans down to a penguin looking at the sunset while the Guts theme was
I
playing.
mean, it's appropriate, honestly. Like it fits.
Yeah, and it's like, haha, that's really funny. And then, actually get to listen to the Guts theme in the context of the show. You're just like,
Pain. nothing but pain.
Man,
Except the track from that show called Forces is hype as a
mm,
motherfucker. That
true,
song whips. Also, I
true.
just noticed that you watched and 5-starred Tetsuo the Iron Man.
Yeah,
Again, enormously powerful energy.
I I
I also
tried.
did the same recently, and that shit slapped.
It is good. I saw it because of you. You and a couple other people were talking about it,
Me
and
and
I'm like,
Morgan were just like, this is the coolest fucking thing I have ever seen.
and it is the coolest thing.
Yeah.
I fucking like. I can't really like discern any other movies that are anything close to what that was like.
And if you're hankering for an animated movie, I recently watched a movie called The Wolf House.
Yes,
Um,
I've been meaning to watch that very
that
much.
very you movie, and also like I watched that movie with two other people, and that scared the fuck out of me. Like the sound
No.
design in that is so unnerving that I was just sitting here like,
Yeah, just be like, I don't like that. I
I
don't want
hate
that.
this. And it's just like the audio in it is like mostly narration, and it's like ASMR of this woman speaking Spanish, and she's just like, Diciembros, las casa de lobos, and you're just like, fucking
And just
stop.
and just say like, get out my head. This
Get out of my head. Just like holding a drill, and you're just like,
and then fucking recreate that scene from Pi.
oh no.
God.
Oh
But
no.
in terms of I actually thinking about now, in terms of things that I could plug, um, go on if you go onto my Twitter, I have a short film that is in my pinned. Watch it.
Go. I have
It
seen this.
it is something
It
that I
is.
made,
It is.
and I guess just I will be editing a short film in the future for school, and I guess that'll probably replace that at some point.
Hell
And
yeah.
I've written scripts that I haven't showed many people that I don't think are very good, but I'm just like, I made them.
It's okay. I don't. I bet fucking Kubrick was just like, ah, this script for fucking Doctor Strangelove is ass.
Yeah, just throw in the trash.
Throw it in the garbage.
The,
The trash man.
the trash.
I go on stage and I eat garbage.
Fucking. I wish Danny DeVito was my motivational speaker.
Danny DeVito cast in Those Who Dwell in the Dark. I don't know who he would be.
He would be a Vaughn.
Just the corpse. Oh
No,
no.
no, actually, better idea. Thanatos, but when they're in their moment of like trying to gain more power, they say, "I just want to be pure."
They look like a garbage baby.
Fucking pretty much, but
Oh, we've exhausted our sanity.
pretty much. We've been at this for like at this point
Oh.
4 hours.
Oh man, I no longer have to have any weird personal fantasies about being interviewed about my fucking work anymore because I
Yeah,
lived it.
you
I've
did
done it.
it. You finally did it. Big hype. The more you know.
Rock over London, rock on Chicago, fucking cinnamon toast crunch, the taste you can
Um,
see.